Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
О, бля! Игорь!
Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt. It's good to see you all once again on day 348 of the news.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine here on day 348, and it has been paired with some incredibly great things to hear and somewhat concerning things to hear overall. But of course, we'll get to that as we cover the news. But tonight is the Sunday fundraiser night. And of course, with the Sunday fundraiser, we have a nonprofit of choice, and tonight's nonprofit is Doctors Without Borders. Doctors Without Borders is my go-to fundraiser here on this channel to fundraise for. They do incredible work saving lives all around Ukraine, both the soldiers and the citizens that find themselves to be the victims of ruthless Russian bombardments on civilian areas. Through their efforts, thousands of people have lived that otherwise wouldn't have been able to. And so I find, in my opinion, Doctors Without Borders does some of the best work that I've ever seen in Ukraine. That's why I have already donated $100 of my own money to Doctors Without Borders tonight on that fundraiser, and we already got up to $2,500. The goal tonight is $7,500, and I have no doubt whatsoever that the Lee Spring Army will not only make it to $7,500, but probably well beyond. Because if anything, the Lee Spring Army always outdoes my expectations on what the fundraisers can do. And so make sure to support Doctors Without Borders tonight, because that will go to help save Ukrainian lives. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on into our first and most interesting bit of news inside of Russia, because it appears that the Russians love news, believe it or not, and they want to buy CNN. This can only go well. Let's watch the video.
Но тут этот ганзейский кретин Шольц меня просто очередной раз...
Oh my god, they brought him up again. Literally in the first 5 seconds, man, he says, Schultz. Good god. They gotta stop with this, man. They need to, like, bar Schultz of being a used word on Russian TV.
Решил выделить 14 Леопардов-2 и 88 Леопардов-1. 14-88. Это нацистское, ганзейское ничтожество, сказал, он не понимает, почему-то Путин все время какие-то, как он сказал, смехотворные исторические отсылки. Ну просто ганзейское, нацистское ничтожество. Да ты что-то поймешь только, когда штык русского солдата тебя усадит на скамью подсудимых. И будет новый Нюрнберг. Ты не понимаешь, какую реакцию у нас вызывают танки с крестами? Ты, нацистская мразь! Лично виновен в том,
He's starting off on a high note tonight, isn't he?
отказался от своего преступного прошлого.
And when the hell have the Germans rejected their own past? I thought that was the thing that haunts them the most is World War II. And this guy's going to sit here and act like the Germans are just the new modern-day Nazi Germany. This guy is just sad. And also, who brought the Madame Tussauds version of him to life tonight? He has never looked like he's been made of wax more than now. Like, right now, he looks like he could be set up in a Madame Tussauds building along his counterpart, and you would think that they had made two of the same person.
Это твоя личная вина. И ты будешь отвечать. И не только на суде истории.
And also, why's he got that Chairman Mao drip on?
Да, 1488, может, не все знают, и слава богу, что не все знают, это нацистский символ зашифрованный. Вот эти вот 14 одних леопардов, 88 других, это нарочно не придумаешь. Надо было... Мне даже не верится, что это могло так получиться случайно. Еще повеселило, конечно, на этой неделе.
I actually think, if I remember correctly, there was something like 14 leopards and 14 leopard 2s and 91 leopard 1s. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I think they're just getting the numbers wrong here as well. So,
противостояние очередное Америки с Китаем. В очередной раз большое уважение Китаю за то, что они делают красиво. И если вы откроете сегодня CNN, у них, конечно, международный CNN. Все про это. Еще немножко про австралийскую девушку, которую покусала акула. Еще немножко про каких-то северокорейских подростков. И вот про шарик. Надо было сбивать, не надо было раньше, надо было позже. А еще где-то там третий. Кто-то там его засек. Венесуэла, то ли Гватемала. Засекли еще третий. Летит. Китайцы умудрились поставить на уши всю страну. И одна единственная статья.
I love how she just said the Chinese turned the whole United States upside down, but, you know, beyond it just being shot down, nothing's really changed for anyone here in the United States. That is some huge projection right there to say they've turned the whole country upside down. Yeah, it's captured public attention, but it's not like the national economy collapsed because of a large helium balloon.
У них просто
At least we still have all of our
большая
F-22s intact and our
про
tanks and planes and everything.
Украину,
Yeah.
про Россию, про всё, что с этим
Yeah.
связано. Меня просто поразила эта статья. Мы так часто задаем в студии вопрос, а что они не понимают? Я все время говорю, они не понимают по той простой причине, что они ничего не знают. Совсем ничего не знают. Даже такие ясные, очевидные исторические параллели, абсолютно сформулированные простым и понятным языком, который всегда приводит наш президент, для них слишком заумные. Понимаешь, для них даже 24 уже слишком заумно.
Actually, that's really hard bidding for a Russian because none of them have basic
невозможно,
understandings
если
of
ты там
math.
не жил, и если ты хотя бы не читаешь их прессу. Я все время вспоминаю Бисмарка, мою любимую фразу, когда он говорил, что есть такое особое провидение, которое управляет пьяницами, идиотами и
You
Соединенными
know what's funny is that they always sit there and talk about Nazi this, Nazi that, and then she just quoted Otto von Bismarck, who I guess you could credit with kind of laying the groundwork for the reason why Germany would be nationalistic enough to become the Nazi Germans in the 30s and 40s. So kind of funny in a way that she would quote Bismarck. Kind of
Штатов
ironic.
Америки. И англоязычная аудитория, тех, кто читает CNN, слава богу, у них падает критически. Аудитория до каких-то как раз на этой неделе упала жутких цифр, за всю историю такого не было.
Может,
И
их
тем не менее.
купить?
А?
Может, их купить, сделать хоть, наконец, нормальный там телевизор.
Normal
Ну,
TV.
заберите.
Sherman Mao wouldn't know a damn thing about normal TV. His whole show, he just cussed out his staff on his other show. Now he's coming over here with the Mao drip, and he's saying we should bring a normal show. With a face like that and a smile like that? Hell no, you're not getting a normal show. That would be a freak show.
I'm sure the CNN would love these people to buy them out at this point.
Oh, honestly,
Заберем
probably.
вас домой, а потом разберемся и с этим. И
Совсем они
Что
не
мы
умеют,
должны-
просто не умеют работать сильно.
понимаешь, что мы должны на это отвечать? Когда я слышу экспертов разных в студии, чаще не в этой, а в других, в любых форматах, которые говорят, надо договариваться, надо уговаривать, надо объяснять. Это мы во всем виноваты, мы же не объясняли. Слушайте, как вы этим объясните, как вы горшку с цветами или засохшей рождественской елкой объясните, что бы то ни было, когда это просто здравствует дерево. И отвечать, конечно, нужно именно так, как мы отвечаем, как нам отвечать приходится. Как этим всем нерусям, вырусям и просто дебилам, если мы говорим про CNN, ответить? Огнем, повторяет Сильвинский, только огнем.
And I love how they always sit there and they say, the Russians are just so misunderstood. If only people talk to us, maybe they would understand where we're coming from. And then they'll sit there and say, you know, if people try and talk to us, we ought to burn them with hellfire and chop their heads off. It always brings a lot of friends around when you say that kind of stuff. And once again, the stupidity is rife on Russian state TV. We're now going to be moving out of Moscow and further south into the area of Voronezh, where we saw a military truck go into a head-on collision with another civilian vehicle, causing a decent amount of damage.
Tony 2.0?
It may be Tony. It may be Tony. We now see this truck pulling out into the large street. This may as well be a boulevard in width. Truck's now driving down the road. We can see some military trucks over there to the left. Red light. The trucks are still passing by. And oh god, oh my god, oh my lord.
Красавец, просто, блядь, красавец.
I was gonna back up now.
He's gonna back up so he can get out and kill the driver probably.
That handled it all right.
Oh man, now he's getting out and assessing the damage. He knows that he won't get any insurance numbers from the Russians. And we can already see some Russian soldiers back here dragging the driver of that truck out, probably to beat him or something similar, but still, the mighty Russian army defeated by the delivery van. I wonder if it was a Panera Bread delivery van, because that would make it even better. And so that's the end of the clip. But right there you can see that the Russian convoy will be staying there for probably a little while before they continue to move on forward. So we're now moving on from this area, and this little bit of news, and on into Ukraine. Well, actually, I forgot. Whoops. I forgot the oil fire is still ongoing in Belgorod at this moment from yesterday. And we got a new picture from today, and it appears that the fire may have actually grown over time, because now the entire sky is filled with a roaring inferno, and it looks like an overcast day with a little bit of sunlight coming through, but the entire thing is a massive oil fire. We have no idea when the Russians might be able to put this fire out, but at the moment, thousands upon thousands of liters of oil and gases are being burned up every single minute that this fire continues to burn. And so a lot of Russian, I guess you could say, supplies are ending up, suffice to say, gone or non-existent. And so we're now going to be moving on from that little picture, and I believe that is our last little bit of news inside of Russia. And let me double check and make sure. Gonna look around. It is. So now it's time for us to move on over into the Czech Republic, where we saw a small video of these T-72EAs being built for the Ukrainian military. And so here's the clip. See them working on those tanks. And it's quite a clean assembly building. Now, the T-72EAs, from what we know, are actually fairly new. So let's pull it up and let's see what kind of information we can get on these things. So T-72 operators and variants. So let's go down to the operators and variants. Let's see, we got the Ural, the T-72A, the M, the EK. We're looking for the EA. Where's the EA? EA Sports in the name, or in the, I don't know what it is. Yeah, whatever.
In the game.
Whatever. Anyways, let's see here. We're going through East Germany, India, Iran, Iraq, Syria. I haven't seen one yet. Romania, Serbia, Slovakia. I think we need to get down to the, wait a minute, it might be under these. T-72E. So let's see, this is an EA. Here we go. The Western partners of Ukraine, trying to compensate for the losses of the armed forces of Ukraine and military equipment, take out Soviet vehicles that have lost their combat capability from storage bases. Why in the world does this sound so freaking charged? Like, whoever wrote this wrote a very charged article saying Soviet vehicles that have lost their combat capability. Wouldn't that be any T-72 for that matter? Like any of it? Like a T-72A has lost its combat capability in the modern world. And also, I brought us to this because I actually saw on Reddit today that this apparently had been written up by a pro-Russian, because earlier on in the day when I saw it before I got on the news, it actually had the Western partners of the Kyiv regime written right here, and it looks like it's been changed to Ukraine now. But it was very charged earlier on, and someone had gotten onto Wikipedia and had written up all the stuff about the T-72EA and how it wasn't a good tank, it just sucked and it was terrible. But that doesn't make any sense, because all T-72s by that regard would suck. Every single one of them. But anyways, moving on from that, the machines received improvements. A passive dynamic protection system, new communication systems, improved machine control ergonomics, or a new digital dashboard. In some cases, well, in all cases, considering it's the same class of tank, more sophisticated equipment for night vision, most likely thermals, yeah, it says thermals, and the engine power was increased to 840 horsepower. So it appears that it will be a much more competent T-72 than we're seeing on the field, and it is great to know that the Ukrainians will be getting these brand new tanks from the Czech Republic. Also really funny to see them write such a charged article like that about the T-72EA, and not about the current Russian tanks that are being used, and we'll scroll all the way back up to find them. The T-72A. Yeah, here we go. So the T-72A reads, an improved version of the basic T-72 Ural. Large numbers of early production Ural models were modernized in the 80s. Searchlights have been placed on the right-hand side of the turret, and look how neutral the wordage is here. It just sounds like, oh, it's a fairly decent tank. It doesn't sit there and try and say, this is from the Putin regime, or anything like that. It just makes it sound like a decent tank, although this thing is dated by every standard now. So, really interesting to know, and something to keep an eye out on if you're ever using Wikipedia. Look for charged wordage. So with that, we're now going to be moving on from the little bit of T-72EA news we got from the Czech Republic, and hopefully we'll see those on the battlefield soon. Unlike Western tanks like the Leopard 2s, the Abrams, and also the Challenger 2s, very little training to no training will be needed that's additional over a normal Ukrainian tanker's training. Most Ukrainian tankers are trained on the T-80 series of tanks or the T-72 series, and this is nothing more than an upgraded version of the T-72, and so additional training will most likely be minimal for the crew members that will be taking over that tank. We're now going to be moving on into Ukraine and covering our location unknowns, because we've had some fairly interesting ones today, starting off with our first little bit where we saw that the Ukrainians have captured a Tor. Some of y'all may also be wondering, have the Ukrainians ever gotten a Tor browser? I don't know, but here's the video. With the music playing, we see the tank pulling the Tor away. It looks like the Tor is missing some tracks, and it's also had a heavy and excessive amount of graffiti drawn up on it. But it still appears that they are going to be taking this away to either be used for scrap or to use some of its parts or something else. We're now going to be moving on from this little clip of news and on out, nope, not there, and on into the next bit of location unknown news, where we also heard, according to the Minister of Defense, Oleksiy Reznikov, that there is a fairly decent amount, a fairly high amount of stockpiles and supplies that have been built up for Ukrainian forces, and this is incredibly important going into the future. In my opinion, I still do not think that the 500,000 man push is going to happen. It appears that many people do believe so, and it seems that in that event, the Ukrainians are ready either to take on somewhat high losses while trying to stop these Russian pushes, or to mobilize even more soldiers and send them to the front so that way they can try and hold the Russians back. There are currently in storage 250,000 bulletproof vests and 150,000 ballistic helmets. They also have hundreds of thousands of sets of winter and summer uniforms, as well as shoes, and also fuel and food supplies. So it seems as though the Ukrainian military will be ready if this large offensive does occur, to be able to try and hold it back, and if need be, mobilize more soldiers and train them, so that way they can hopefully negate or completely stop Russian pushes heading further into Ukraine. So here's the other picture that we had. This is just of a small, looks like quartermaster's office somewhere in Ukraine, but it doesn't show the entire stockpile. But you can see a lot of bulletproof vests right there, and hopefully they won't be needed in the future, but if they are, the Ukrainians certainly have a large enough number of them. We're now going to be moving on from that news and into our next bit of news inside of the location unknowns, where we can see a second view of a barn clearing that we saw occur a while ago. This was actually taken from the person who looked into the barn. So here's a video. You see him opening up the door, we hear the music playing, and we can see a Russian right in there. Right there, you can see his white armbands, and it looks like the Ukrainian walked in and he said, "Oh, sorry," and then he just backed right out. We now see that he's fallen over, and we're gonna have to mute this now.
Oh yeah, hard base.
And we can see that he may have gotten shot in the vest, but they're now firing into the building. We now see them tossing grenades inside to make sure that the guy is good and gone. They're still firing through the tin sheets covering the window, throwing in another grenade, backing off. The grenade then explodes, taking out the window, and it appears that they then went on to clear the other buildings around the area, and they may have done a fairly good job because it doesn't look like they took many losses, although there may have been a couple of wounded. That's the end of that clip, but once again, very nice to see that the Ukrainians are clearing out these barns, and that guy was in a really close call. I mean, like, he was literally face to face with that Russian for a split second, and it was lucky that he was able to back out and then counter the Russian by tossing some nades and firing into the building.
Also, I think this footage is old.
Yes, that's what I said.
It's from 1987.
No, not 1987.
I'm just playing. I know it's a mistake.
I was about to say, I was like, man, 1987. Well, I know there's going to be someone, though, man, at the end of the live chat saying, it's old, it's from Chechnya, or something like that. It's from Chechnya. Because of that, like, they're going to be serious.
Oh, yeah, everybody's saying that at this point.
But with that, we're now moving on from that little clip and on into our next one, where we saw a picture of Russians using some jamming equipment. These appear to be something new. We don't know how effective they are, considering that this picture was taken directly above it from a drone. But supposedly, these wait until drones are in the distance, they detect the drone, and then activate, causing the drones to be jammed and force landing them. We don't really know how effective these things are, and considering that they look fairly bulky and heavy, I would assume that their deployment on the front lines is only near roads or very close to roads, and that they're also incredibly expensive for that reason as well. And so we may see that there's very few of these in Ukraine Although it is still interesting to see that the Russians are attempting to try and commit some kind of electronic warfare to take the drones down. So with that, that's the end of that little bit of news right there, and it's now time for us to go and travel on to the Kyiv Independent, all the way on Twitter, way across the seas, to go and check out what the news is from Kyiv Independent. Oh, sorry, that's the website. We got to go to the Twitter. Let's go on down to the Twitter. Let's scroll on down, and they should have the loss count for the 5th, which is today. And here we go. So, another 700 Russian soldiers wiped off the face of the earth. A fairly good number, and I shall allow y'all a moment to contemplate on how large of a number that is. Now that I've drinking my small bit of water, they also lost 11 armored personnel carriers, quite a decent number, especially at this point in the war. Another 10 supply trucks have been destroyed, an incredibly high number, especially at this point, most likely causing some units to lack vital supplies today. 2 main battle tanks were destroyed, not an exceptionally high number even compared to the current standards. This is somewhat low. 6 artillery pieces were destroyed. That's a fairly average number. 2 drones were destroyed. The drones, it can really change from day to day how many drones have been destroyed. It really just depends on what the Russian drone forces are doing. So only 2 of them were shot down today. Another 2 anti-aircraft systems were destroyed. And unfortunately, no Bobcat skid steers were destroyed today. Now that I've taken my other sip of water,
terrible.
And now that I've taken my other sip of water and allowed Matthew some reaction time to that terrible news, and I'm sure he's shaken because of it, we're now going to be moving on from the loss report. But you can see that once again, the Russians have lost almost an entire battalion tactical group due to the normal rigors of war again today. Just killed alone. We're not even talking about the wounded. We don't even know what the wounded numbers look like, but the killed are getting incredibly high. They've already reached 131,290 dead at this point. And so, with that, we're now going to be moving on from the loss report and on out of the location unknowns. And we're now going to start moving into the direction of Kharkiv, where we do have some unfortunate news as Russian rocket and missile attacks hit the city today, killing a few people and causing some damage to the nearby area.
Что мы тут недалеко как бы живем, а бабушка была одна дома. Бабушка в шоке, она в принципе еле ходит, поэтому ее пришлось на носилках выносить. Но живая, и слава богу, вот она как раз здесь была, просто оно все посыпалось. Ну а так у нее нету травм. Но она в шоке, конечно. Вот это ее кроватка, это хорошо, что она встала и пошла в ванну. Видите, кроватка засыпана просто.
We now see them leaving the building. We can see the damage that's been caused to the buildings nearby.
Просто они позвонили, я проснулся от взрыва, услышал, что где-то рядом, и они позвонили, сказали, что попало в нашу квартиру. Они чудом не выжили. Вот.
Dutch Argent coming in clutch.
У него упало все сверху. Ну, там ранений серьезных нету, слава богу. Вот. А мама была в туалете, вот мне как раз просто повезло. Живи, здоровье, да. А квартира, ну, стены остались только, а все внутри, все гипсокартонное перекрытие, все свалило. Все розвалилось.
2 ворожі ракети поцілили безпосередньо в середмістя Харкова, Київський район, одна з яких влучила в вищий навчальний заклад, в будівлю, частково зруйновані конструкції 5-го та 4-го поверхів, сталася пожежа.
На жаль, всі корпуси постраждали, бо другий удар з іншої сторони пошкодив всі наші будівлі, вікна, двері, обладнання, адміністративний корпус, де всі працювали, це серце університету теж сьогодні дуже серйозно постраждав. Ми витримали перші удари, витримаємо і цей удар.
That's the end of the video, of course, provided by Radio Free Europe, but once again showing the Russians attacking civilian areas inside of Ukraine and trying to pretty much commit genocide against the people at large. It's always terrible to see that, because we know that at the end of the day, only normal people all over Ukraine, both the soldiers and the citizenry, are suffering from this war, and of course, hopefully that suffering will end soon, and the Ukrainians can push the Russians off the field. However, at this moment, it appears that the war will continue on for quite some while, and if y'all stick around, we will be getting to that here incredibly soon, especially in the Bakhmut area. But with that, it's now time for us to move on from Kharkiv and into the northeastern area where we've gotten a small bit of news today, but once again, we have not seen a lot of movement. Before we get into the exact breakdown of what's been going on in the northeast and what we may be seeing and expecting, we are going to be covering our polls that we've been throwing up, because Matthew's been throwing up some excellent polls, and we're also going to be recognizing all of the people who've gotten us to nearly $4,500 at this point in the stream. Absolutely unbelievable, because it's only been 35 minutes since this stream went live, and we're well over halfway to the goal for tonight. And so, Matthew, name off those top donors so that way we can recognize them and everyone else who's helped out with supporting this fundraiser from Doctors Without Borders.
All right, so I'm happy to report we are at $4,500 on the fundraiser, and tonight's goal is not $5,000, it's $7,500. So we still have a little ways to go, but we're making really good progress. And real quick, let me grab one or two things here. There we go. All right, so we have quite a long list of top donors tonight as well. So up first, we have a $1,000 donation from Miss Disa that came in earlier. Thank you very much. That is very generous. And right now, the highest donation of the night. Also, we have a $500 from Dutch Arjen, which is also very, very generous. We have a $200 from Enforcer for President, as well as Sharon Tukolsky, along with a $150 from DCC Prime 1. Then we have several $100 donations. The first one's from Panama Floyd. Then we have one from Donna Olson, Activista, and Barb Moody. Then we have a 69 from Psyops. Nice.
Nice.
Then we have several 50s. The first is from Misk77. Then we have one from Marion Diemert, Santiago Flores, R&R, Tony Fleming, Dad Good, Retail Mix USA, Avari Mandubratis, and finally, Marion Diemert. So thank you very much to all of you, including the ones that we were unable to call out right now. But we appreciate it very much. And Enforcer, what say you?
I gotta say, it's absolutely unbelievable to see how far we've made it tonight already, and how some of y'all have supported so much, like you, Miss Disa, who I just saw you in the live chat right there saying, starting my annual donations early this year. And I gotta thank you for doing that, because that $1,000 is certainly going a long way to helping out Ukrainians that have been injured in this current war, and they're almost on the verge of death, mortally wounded sometimes, and Doctors Without Border is saving their lives. And so I've got to thank all of y'all so much once again. Everyone we called out, and also everyone we weren't able to call out. There is a large number of y'all who send in $5 donations, $20 donations, and even down to $1 donations. But it is the thought that counts. And through all of those little donations and the massive donations, the Lee Spring Army comes together every single time to reach the fundraiser goals and to give a massive amount of help and support to Ukraine. And so I got to thank everyone so much once again for helping out with this fundraiser. And once again, just to remind everyone, tonight is not about the news. The news is always the priority on every day of the week, except for today. Tonight's priority is the fundraiser. And so I highly encourage y'all to support tonight's fundraiser. 100% of your funds go directly to that nonprofit. So if you send in $5 goes directly to Doctors Without Borders. YouTube covers all of the fees. It's also, I guess you could say, accounted for by YouTube from end to end, so there's no way that anything can happen that's questionable, and I highly recommend it. This is the only way we fundraise on this channel because it's incredibly safe, and I hope that due to it being safe and also...
Dang.
Oh my god!
There's Mark.
There's Mark. Mark is here. That's it. Welcome, Mark. Mark just put in 1.5 thousand New Zealand dollars. I don't know what that translates to directly in dollars, but I think he just usurped Miss Disa for the top title of highest donor tonight.
Let's check. 1,500 NZ to USD. 949.27. He almost did it. Very
so close. Man. That was so close, Mark. Y'all are almost neck and neck, right? James Liswowski. I don't know how to pronounce that. I know I butchered that.
I think
sorry.
It's maybe it's Heim, I think. Or is it James?
I don't really know. I'm sorry for butchering your name, though. But you donated $200. We just got up to $5,700. We are getting really close to tonight's goal. This is crazy. But with that, I thank you all so much once again, and I hope that this fundraiser goes to the moon. It's already well on its way, and I hope the next time we look over, it has made it. So with that, let's go over some of the polls, because some of them have been incredibly interesting. So with that, what do we got?
All right, so let's address the one that is currently running first. It says Ukraine's Minister of Defense, Alexei Reznikov, is due to be replaced due to a corruption allegation. What are your thoughts? And also, just for some clarification, I saw some folks saying that story is not accurate, but I have verified, according to many sources, that apparently there was a lot of corruption within the division, and he was the leader of it, so responsibility falls on him. And also, I've not been able to confirm it yet, but he might have already resigned, but I have not checked that yet. But it looks like 74% said good. It's nice to remove corrupt officials. 6% said unsure. 17% said I need more info first. And 3% said that's bad. It will cause instability. And I must say, I'm a big believer in innocent until proven guilty. I don't know enough about the situation to say whether or not he's truly corrupt or not, so I'm going to say I need more info first. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say, and this is, of course, it always sounds really weird when you say this. I don't know the exact story with Oleksiy Reznikov, whether he was directly involved in the corruption or if the corruption occurred below him, but as the very head of the Ministry of Defense, if there is any corruption that occurs within the ministry at the higher levels, he does end up taking the responsibility for it, whether he directly knew about it or not. Kind of similar to how the President of the United States can take responsibility for any misdoings, corruption, or misdealings that occur within agencies of the executive branch. The person at the very top does have to end up taking responsibility for everything, so with that in mind, I don't know if he was directly involved in it or not. I'm going to have to withhold judgment before I can look into the story and read into it a little bit better. But that is just what happens, and that is part of being a leader and taking responsibility for what the subordinates are doing. So with that, I hope that answers that poll fairly well, in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one. A lot of y'all voted on that too. 1,400 of y'all. That may be one of the highest voted polls I've seen in a bit.
Yeah, I think so. Very, very a lot of votes. Also, if you're wondering, folks, I'm a little distracted because tonight on Fundraiser night is always hectic for me over on this end. So real quick, let me grab one or two things here.
And also, let me give another shout out to Mark, who came in and did it again. He put in another 500 New Zealand dollars. So total, now he has beat Miss Disa in total funds raised tonight for Doctors Without Borders. So interesting, Mark. Very interesting. Are we about to have a fundraiser battle here? And also, we are only $1.1 thousand away from the goal. We're getting really close to reaching goal even before the first hour ends. So keep that in mind, everyone. We can have the bragging rights tonight. Oh my gosh, Ash Van S is definitely going to help out with that, putting in a $250 donation and getting us up to 6.7. We might reach the $7.5 thousand goal before the first hour of the stream's even over. But with that, let's get on to the next poll and let's see how crazy it gets in between now and when we end that poll.
All right, and also shout out to Benjamin Rude for putting in a $50 donation as well, and thank you very much for that. Also, we had a 50 from Rustin Rot, too. Thank you as well, Rustin Rot. And our very first poll, and our last one for the first question segment, says Russian forces allegedly seize and burn Ukrainian books in the occupied region of Luhansk. What are your thoughts? It looks like 42% said it's typical Russian behavior, 4% said unsure, 19% said they are now erasing Ukrainian culture, and 35% said both option 1 and 3. And I'm going to go with both option 1 and 3. The Russians are doing things that are really heinous, and also it does seem like they're trying to erase Ukrainian culture. It seems like they're taking a notion out of the book that we had to read in high school. I can't remember the name of it. They were burning the books. What was it called? Fahrenheit something?
Fahrenheit 451?
Yeah, it's like reminiscent of that book.
Yeah, I got to be honest with you, I didn't really find the book to be that great. You know, just being...
Oh, it definitely wasn't good.
Yeah, it wasn't great.
Not.
It was interesting as a concept, but I feel like the execution was lacking on that book. But moving on from that and answering the poll, I believe that it is the first and the third option. They are committing cultural genocide, and they're also trying to erase Ukrainian identity and heritage by burning these books. It's not something that is that new, actually. Burning books and destroying information that's related to one's culture has been going on since the very dawn of time. And the fact that the Russians are doing it only shows that they're one of the, what we would call the bad people of history, because of course, many of y'all know the other bad people who did that very recently in modern history, which were the Nazi Germans of the 30s and 40s. They would go and burn plenty of books that went against party ideology, and the Soviet Union would as well. They would destroy anything that ended up showing communism, socialism, or anything similar, or the government in a negative light. That was all the way up until the 80s, when Gorbachev took over and he brought in perestroika and glasnost, which are two of the largest contributing factors that led to the actual collapse of the Soviet Union. The war, there was a whole bunch of other stuff. Good Lord, Mark! Golly,
Dang.
he threw in another
He just
one.
put in that 500 and plus another one, but it came through as anonymous. So he just put in 1,000 NZ.
Man, crazy, Mark, crazy. And I got to thank you for that. You are helping out to a massive degree. And we are only $300 away from the goal. We are actually about to reach the goal before we even get through with the first hour. I think that's crazy. But anyways, with that, I hope we answered that poll fairly well because I think it is the first and the third option. And with that, we are on to the next poll.
All right. And also, I'm not for sure, but I think Mark said he's got to go to a family event or something. So, Mark, if you are getting off for the night, thank you for stopping by and supporting the fundraiser so generously. And thank you very much.
And thank you,
And
Mark. But
yes.
before Mark goes, just in case if you have a little family function or event, hope you have fun. Best of luck, and thank you so much for dropping by and helping to support this fundraiser. Your support, while you're just like pretty much doing like I got to drop by and get this done with quick, you are saving lives over there in Ukraine. And I got to thank you so much, as well as Miss Disa and Dutch Arjen and everyone else who's been massive donors and even small donors tonight for helping out. Every little bit counts, and every one of y'all is helping to save a life over there. Like Snoozy Green, who just put in 150, and we are almost at 7.5. We are right there, actually. Like maybe a few dollars away. So the next person that puts in a donation may actually get us over that mark. So with that, we are on to the next poll. But I'll see you around, Mark, if you are leaving.
All right. And also shout out to Axel K for putting in a 50 as well. And thank you also. Looks like we are right on the verge of that $7.5 thousand figure too, by the way. Also, while we're waiting. Oh, wait, was that it?
Oh, we did it! We
Jaga,
did
jaga.
it! Igor! Man, we did
Big
it.
shout out to Daniel Murray for putting in a 50.
We did it. We've reached the goal. Sheffield is going on to the World Cup. But anyways, absolutely incredible, everyone. I cannot believe that we made it to the fundraiser goal. And we actually made it higher, $2.5 thousand higher than normal. And we've reached it in less than an hour. We've reached it in less than 50 minutes. I can't believe that. And I'm wondering, Matthew, should we raise it? Should we?
I don't know.
I don't know. Put it up to a vote, Matthew. Call him out. Put it up to a poll. We got to figure it out. And while Matthew is before you make that poll, Matthew, read me off the next poll so that way I can be answering that. And in the meantime, you can make that poll.
Oh, there is no other poll, so this will be our next poll. Shall we raise the goal to, what, 10K?
10K.
All right, and we have option for yay and nay. Here we go. And there it is.
Now y'all know what it means. You know, we got it. Oh, 100%. Dang. 84%. And we'll let that simmer for a while, but now let's get into some live chats, and then we're going to triumphantly enter the next segment of news, now already reaching our first goal.
And also, shout out to Rocco World Domination for putting in a $100 donation to the fundraiser, and thank you very much for that as well. And also to William Ludwig, he puts in 100. DC Williams puts in a 300. We're having a frenzy here. Let's see. I get no respect. I get no respect
around here. But anyways,
right. So I think that was the frenzy for the moment. But also, if you have a question for us, please feel free to put it in at Enforcer Matt in the chat, and I'll add it to the spreadsheet. There are no super chats tonight, so the odds of getting to your question are much higher tonight. So the very first question we have is actually the Morse code, which tonight was solved by Rumpelstiltskin, CFA, WFTU, Mark Hodges, JP's RCs, and Cliff Simonson, who says the Morse code says Russians take a field like they're idiots or something. I don't know.
You got it correct. They take it like idiots or something. I don't know. Also, one second. I'm having a really hard time finding the fundraiser because here we go. Here it is. I think this is the one that's running right now. Let me check. Yes, this is the one running right now. Let me go and change that to 10K because it looks like it's unanimous. Everyone wants it going up. So we're going to put that right there and save. And now it should have changed. And boop, there we go. Now it's changed. Now, I would say, in my opinion, can you reread it again?
Russians take a field like they're idiots or something. I don't know.
think, okay, now that was the Morse code message. Now I remember where we were at. That is the correct Morse code message, and I actually couldn't really come up with one that was too good tonight, and I was going to try and come up with something smart, so then I just put ... like idiots or something I don't really know, because I was like, I don't really know what they're taking it like anymore. They're just stupid, and that's all that it comes down to. So with that, thank you all for deciphering that Morse code message, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and real quick, let me grab one more. Actually, I'll just go ahead and read this one off. We have a question from Christian Cruz, who says, if Putin decides to attack Kyiv on the anniversary of the first attack, won't it just result in a new 40-kilometer traffic jam, but this time Ukraine has HIMARS, meaning it's a shooting gallery?
Great question. If they invade again, and I'll tell you this, I'm thinking, because from what I originally used to hear about this new second invasion way earlier on, was that it was going to be happening again in the north and the northeast, like you're thinking. Nowadays, I'm hearing that apparently these forces are being built up in the south and the southeast, and they're going to be adding on to the additional force strength they have there. We're not really sure yet which one it is, although it seems like a lot of people are now going with the buildup in the southeast. I don't really know. But anyways, if it happened again, I would agree with you that it would just create a large traffic jam again in between Chernobyl and Demir. And I remember back in the day, Matthew, this was something else that we got correct over the military analysts. So that the military analyst said that that 40 to 50 mile long convoy was a giant logistics convoy, and that they were going to be setting up supply bases to help the Russians just steamroll the Ukrainians through Kyiv, and the war would be over by next week. And then that never happened. They never built the FOBs. We then found out later, and the military analyst did, that the entire thing was a combat convoy. Every single part of it wasn't supplies, it was all fighting units, and then they had to spread them out off the road so that way the road could be used at all, and so that way they didn't get destroyed while sitting there on the road, because about 10 miles of that convoy ended up getting destroyed by drones and artillery and other forms of attacks that the Ukrainians committed on it. So once again, kind of funny to remember that, because we got that right back then, that it wasn't a supply convoy, it was a combat convoy that had absolutely stopped dead in its tracks and wasn't getting anywhere. But with
whatever happened to that convoy, is it still like pulled off the side of the road or something?
No, a lot of it, well, some of it got destroyed. They then pushed one forward and added it in as reinforcements. They took most of it and pulled them back into Belarus and then sent them into the south and the southeast. So they've been fighting down there for a good bit, or they've probably been rotated off of the line at this point, considering that was way earlier on in the war when that happened. But by and large, it either just got destroyed or they fell right back into Belarus and then got relocated elsewhere. But that's what happened to it. And that's probably what would happen again if they tried that a second time, especially down the same avenues of advance. And there's not really different areas in northern Ukraine that you can advance from. There's only a small few. And once again, armies are relegated to larger roadways or paved roadways because they require those to keep up the supply demands of the entire armed force they have that's advancing forward. So I would agree with you entirely. It will create a second traffic jam, and it wouldn't pose well for them, especially considering that the Ukrainians have much more competent and sophisticated artillery pieces that are more destructive. It will most likely lead to higher Russian losses, kind of like we're seeing now in the Bakhmut area. So I hope we answered that question fairly well, and now we're on to the last one, and then we're going to be getting on into the next segment of news.
All right, so our last question goes to Charles Winthrop, who says, Enforcer and Enforcer Matt, do you think Putin will use a dirty bomb or a nuke?
I do not think Putin will use a dirty bomb or a nuke. If they use a dirty bomb, it'll most likely be traced back to Russia immediately, and that will get the United States involved in the war. If they use a tactical nuclear weapon, that will also get America into the war, because we've made a red line that we've made very clear will not be crossed. And if they cross that line, we'll be getting directly involved with or without NATO. And even without NATO, the United States can single-handedly take on the Russians and defeat them quite easily. We don't even need NATO to take care of that for us. We could do that while sitting down with a hand tied behind our back, blindfolded, because of how stupid the Russians are. So I would say he's probably not going to do either, and the chances are slim to none. That's why he's always bringing it up as a threat. And if you go through the news articles throughout the years, all the way from about 2009 to the present day, you'll see that this is something that Putin has always threatened to everyone, is that the war will be different than they think it will be. Like the Cold War didn't happen or something. You know, that's a stupid arguing point that Putin said. You know, the war's not going to be like they think it is. It's like throughout the entirety of the Cold War, the reason we didn't go to war with them is because we understood it would be a nuclear war. So why in the world would it be different now? That's the exact same thing it was for about 70 years.
Exactly.
You know, I honestly think he's about as stupid as the rest of them.
I would agree with that assessment for sure.
I would agree with that as well, considering that I was the one who made it. So with that, I hope we...
Also,
oh?
before you move on to the next segment, Psyops has been doing some really, really good journalistic work over here on that earthquake that happened in Turkey. It looks like it was a magnitude 7.8 earthquake. It happened near the city of Gaziantep. I'm probably mispronouncing that. But it was felt in the capital as well as other cities. And I don't see anything in here about whether or not it affected any of the defense contracting places or not that make the Bayraktars, but maybe you can let us know.
Can you tell me how to spell the name of that town again real quick?
It's Gaziantep.
Let's see here. Where is this? Oh, this
Pretty
is
massive earthquake, by the way. 7.8 is a doozy.
Oh, that is quite a big one. So real quick to go over this, I know we didn't really cover this a lot at the beginning of tonight's stream, but this is something fairly interesting and it pertains to Turkey. A 7.4 magnitude earthquake rocked the area around Gaziantep, or I may be mispronouncing that drastically, so take that with a grain of salt how I pronounce that, but anyways, it hit this area quite heavily. It appears that there have been several killed, 17 dead, and actually everyone's reporting it as a 7.8 or a 7.9. Reuters is saying it's a 7.9. And this is in the area of the northern Syrian border. Now, this actually ties in a little bit to the Syrian civil war as well, which is something that is indirectly related at this moment to the war in Ukraine and also to Turkey. And this is a reason why I say Turkey is doing Turkey things, because the West in NATO supports the Syrian Democratic Forces, which are the two forces in Syria that are in orange and yellow that control the majority of the eastern side of Syria. The Turks then invaded and actually fought both the SDF forces and also the Syrians as well, and pushed in and took over a decent amount of the northern Syrian border area. This seems to be on the surface a weird thing for Turkey to do, like they're just going directly against the West. But interestingly enough, I have watched and read a lot about Turkey recently in my free time, trying to figure out why Turkey does things they do. And it turns out that Turkey does these Turkey things because back in the day, you remember when al-Bashir al-Bashar was kind of like a big guy and, you know, he was running Syria and it was a complete country?
Yeah.
So what he was doing is that he was providing guerrilla warfare training and also arms and ammunition to a group of people, an ethnic group of people that live within Turkey called the Kurds. And I know, Matt, that you've probably heard a lot about the Kurds, and a lot of our viewers have also heard about the Kurds, because they make up a large amount of the population in northern Iraq, around the area of Erbil, in northern Syria, where the SDF and also the Kurdistan forces are currently operating right now. Those are the, I guess you could say, groups in orange and yellow. And they also live in the southern area of Anatolia, which is where Turkey is. And so they equipped these people and they pitted them against the Turkish government. And for most of the time that happened throughout the Cold War, the Turkish people believed and the Turkish government believed that these Kurdish militants were being supplied, trained, and armed by the Soviet Union. And so they had a lot of animosity towards the Soviets, but it was later on discovered the Syrians were actually doing that in an attempt to try and build some kind of brand new Assyrian empire that the Assads would control. So then that's what pitted the Turks against the Syrians, and so their goal of pushing into Syria is not to support the West. It's not also to screw over the West either. It's to go in and try and beat Assad's rear end because of what he did with the Kurds. So that's why they're getting involved, and that's also why they pushed into this northern area as well, because the orange area is actually controlled by the Kurds, not the SDF. The SDF is in yellow, the Kurds are in orange, and that's why they also pushed in there, is because they're trying to take care of Assad and the Kurds as well. So it's an entirely Turkish affair with what's going on there. And that's why they did that, which is incredibly weird. But this town where the earthquake occurred is just north of part of the area that they control in Syria right now. So that is incredibly interesting. It's not going to affect the industrial base of Turkey. Most of Turkey's wealthier industrial base exists west of Ankara. If you drew a line north to south across Turkey, the western side would be your wealthy industrial area. Your eastern side would be your less wealthy and more agricultural area of the country. So it didn't affect anything severely, probably with the Bayraktars, but I bet you that the seismic activity was certainly felt and probably brought up some concerns. So with that, I hope we addressed the earthquake in Turkey fairly well, and now it's time for us to move on from Turkey and Turkey things, and now it's time for us to move on into Ukraine and continue on our news in the northeastern area. Starting off with our frontline analysis over the past 24 hours, we have seen that absolutely nothing has changed, and no frontline movement has occurred. However, we have seen some activity undertaken by Ukrainian forces in the area as a drone hit Russian forces here today. And we're going to have to mute that, but we can see the Russians hiding right here in the somewhat destroyed house. And I say somewhat, meaning very destroyed house. We can now see the bomblet falling on its way and exploding. Now you can see some Russians taking a kneel, or I guess you could say crouching along the wall, better way to say it, as they sit there and think, I'm kind of getting sleepy. We now see the Russians moving around in the house again. And with that, that's the end of the clip, but I gotta say, it's nice to see that they were able to get some of these Russians in these destroyed houses. We're now moving out to the area of Svatove and further south, and into a general area of the front line that we located near the area of Plashanka, where we saw a captured electronics vehicle and some Ukrainian soldiers posing in front of their prize. This thing is a Layer 3, or an RB-341V. Now, I bet you there's not a lot of information out there on this thing, but let's see if there is. So, it appears that Defense Blog has one of these. It looks like it was spotted and it was brand new in 2016, but it looks like it's not brand new anymore. We can also see that it was equipped with Orlan 10s. Oh, scary. It was intended for the monitoring of GSM communication networks, the determination of system identifiers and mobile stations and their locations, and the transmission of obtained data. It appears that this one won't be doing any of that anymore because it's now fallen into Ukrainian hands, and it probably will be used by the Ukrainian forces. Also, it's really neat to see that all of these guys have winter camo on, and also some of them have camouflage guns. Overall, fairly nice. We're now going to be moving on from this little Layer 3 because, you know, there's just too many layers to this story for us to cover on stream. And we're now moving on out of the northeastern area because those were the only two bits of news that we had from the area. But as we move closer to Bakhmut, the news does start to pick up again, as we saw a drone dropping its munitions and once again taking out even more Russians in this area. These were resting under a tree, quite lackadaisically, but that's not always smart to do. And we can see that they'll pay the price here as they now aim their gun in the air, the F1 grenade gets dropped right on top of them, and it explodes right on top of them. We now see one guy going for the tactical. He did the roll, and it didn't help him out in the end, actually. He actually pretty much just rolled where he'd be flushed right alongside the grenade. So it looks like none of them ended up doing good from the training.
It's the Russians' luck. The only piece of training they listen to doesn't work.
Interesting. And so with that, that's the end of the video. Fairly interesting to see. And also, it will be Turkey to me. I don't know how to pronounce it the new way. It has been called, the official name is the Republic of Turkey. It's Turkey. So we're now going to be moving on from this clip and on into the northern area of the Bakhmut front. And this has been somewhat concerning today if we go over a frontline analysis. Over the past 24 hours, we've seen what I would say for the Battle of Bakhmut, a sizable breakthrough in the area just south of Blahodatne right here. The Russians have appeared to have taken 2 entire fields over the course of the past 24 hours, and considering that this kind of ground has rarely ever been made in the Battle of Bakhmut, this may be, in the context of this battle, a Russian breakthrough. This could be somewhat concerning because if they've made it beyond most Ukrainian lines of defense, they could start moving directly towards the highway and cut the M03 off, and also start to directly threaten the forces found within Krasna Hora. If this does happen, we will probably see that the Ukrainian retreat from Krasna Hora becomes imminent, and they'll probably try and reform a defensive line in the area of Berkivka or Irikovo-Vasilivka, as there's another ridgeline in this area, or they may begin to consider a complete withdrawal from the area and the Bakhmut city region as well. We have been starting to see that there may be indications that the Battle of Bakhmut has finally reached some of its end phases. After lasting for nearly 12 months from the beginning of the First Battle of Bakhmut up until the present day, Bakhmut has been a fortress for the Ukrainian forces and an absolute sponge for Russian losses as they soaked up tens of thousands of dead and more than tens of thousands wounded in a failed attempt month after month to capture the city. The Russians may have been able to pull it off. Probably in the near future, we may see that if the Ukrainians cannot recover and turn the situation around, that may become inevitable. However, the fact of the matter is that once again, the war is a defensive war, and as long as the Ukrainians are able to conduct a war of attrition against the Russians and wipe out most of their fighting manpower, most of their equipment and vehicles, the Russians will eventually run out of supplies, run out of equipment, and be forced back on the retreat and out of their country. To once again cite an example from the current, from the past, the battles of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk were far larger in scale. Both of those cities may as well have been combined with a combined population of nearly 260 to 270,000 people, and their capture didn't have much of a strategic impact on the conducting and affairs of the war, and we can see that even to this day, nothing has really come out of the Battle of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, although at the time, it was the most important battle occurring over all of Ukraine. The Battle of Bakhmut has been the most contended and also the deadliest battle in the war, most likely for the Russians and the Ukrainians, but it appears that the Russians are finally taking it, and they're not going to be getting any massive gain out of it. It doesn't really matter much, especially considering that Izium and Liman have been captured by a Ukrainian counteroffensive, meaning that if they are able to take Bakhmut, and this was part of a larger plan to eventually encircle Slovyansk and Kramatorsk and have two larger prongs that could move in and take those cities, that will no longer happen as the Russians are not even close to controlling Liman or Izium any longer. So Bakhmut practically serves no real purpose again. And it looks like the Ukrainians have been able to bleed the Russians dry for a town that actually has no merit or no impact on the real war. But of course, that's still yet to be seen. The Ukrainians have not retreated out of the town yet. We've been getting conflicting reports from some units. The Freedom of Russia Legion says that the line's holding strong and they are staying there. Some units are starting to say that it's a very, very precarious situation and they may start to reorganize the line and prepare new defensive positions. We don't really know what will be going on now, but hopefully the Ukrainians will be able to bleed the Russians for a little bit of extra manpower and guys before they completely withdraw from the city, if they do. And so with that, we're now moving into the Soledar area where we can see some Russians running from some artillery. When you see the Russians running away from the blast, and it appears that one of them actually has a long piece of toilet paper stuck to their boot. And he does! Oh my god!
Я снимаю. Сука, обосрыши, блядь.
Oh my lord.
I didn't know they had toilet paper.
I didn't know they had toilet paper either. They don't have toilets, but they got toilet paper. Who would have known? But that's the end of that clip. And nice to see that they caught them literally running out of the house with toilet paper still stuck to their boots. We're now moving on into the second clip that we say is from the northern area, where we saw that an M109 howitzer had been hit somewhat severely and was being taken off the line for repairs. When you see the car pulling up alongside the M109, and right here, when you see the damage taken. Interestingly enough, it appears that it only penetrated the front, I guess you could say cargo hold. It did not pierce the armor of the M109, but it appears that it was damaged enough and the subsequent fire required that it be pulled off the lines for further repairs before it could be used again. But it appears that it was more so, at least from what we can tell, superficial damage. But once again, considering that they're taking it off the line, it may be more serious than we can see. That's the end of the video, but very interesting to see, and good to know that there are Western artillery pieces in the area still operating, and one of the few times we've ever seen one get hit. We're now moving on from that clip and further on down into the Bakhmut area, where we saw the Freedom of Russia Legion saying that Bakhmut stands, and they'll continue to hold and fight for the city.
5 февраля 2022 года, Бахмут, Украина. Утро тихое, орки еще не проснулись, не начали снова все равнять с землей артиллерии. И такое ощущение, даже если не смотреть по сторонам, как будто нет войны. последнее время они все чаще разгоняют по своим инфопомойкам информацию о том, что они уже почти захватили город, что они ведут бои в северных и южных его кварталах. Это все дезинформация. Дезинформация, потому что город держит доблестная украинская пехота. Ей помогаем мы, бойцы иностранного легиона, бойцы легиона Свобода России. За моей спиной вы видите целую гору пустых тубусов и ящиков от минометных мин. Мы поддерживаем нашу пехоту. Все это летит точно на голову врагов, поэтому особого успеха они не имеют. Да, они стараются взять город в кольцо, окружить его. Скажу сразу, сохраним армию, сохраним Украину. Поэтому мы не позволим себя окружить. Тем не менее, бои в городе продолжаются. Город не сдан. Войска, которые надо сменить, идут на ротацию. Свежие резервы подходят. Боеприпасов, как видите, хватает. Мы держимся. Мы ведем бой. Слава Украине! Свобода России!
Well, that's the end of the video. And once again, a huge shout out to the Freedom of Russia Legion that is fighting their own people inside of the city to make sure that it holds. And it appears that this soldier in his briefing shows that they're very confident of their position within the city itself and that they've been holding the Russians back incredibly well. And based off of what we've been seeing, they have been doing an exceptional job, an absolutely terrific one. We're now moving further down the city of Bakhmut and into the area of Opitne, where we saw the Georgian Legion come under some shelling today. We can hear some explosions and reports in the distance. We can see them looking around. We can hear the explosions getting a little bit closer. It sounds almost like a rolling barrage. We now see the Legion starting to move. And with that, that's the end of the clip, but you can hear the ferocious barrages and artillery that's being levied against the town as the Russians try and break the Ukrainian forces up and out of the city. But of course, the Ukrainians are not yielding, and they are still holding the town with incredible fervor. We're now going to be moving on from this area and into the next bit of news behind the lines, where we saw that a squad was retreating from Bakhmut. Now, if we could get a translation, real quick, actually, I believe there is a translation down here. Let's see here. See, drawing by foot. I agree with you. So it looks like some people are actually throwing in questions as to whether these are actually Ukrainians or Russians posing as Ukrainians. But let's take a look at the video, and supposedly the video is Ukrainian soldiers moving back, most likely into the area of Chasiv Yar.
Вышли мы с этого ада. Бахмут, горит весь. Мы еле вышли группами мелкими. Наше начальство на нас хуй забило. Говорю как есть. Пацанов потеряли сегодня. За полчаса 4 трехсотых, 2 двухсотых. Бахмут. Вот все, кто остался. Вот группка. Уходим отсюда. Пиздец, блядь. Ад, там просто ад. Ребята, там ад. Я вам говорю. Всем давайте, нам надо идти.
And with that, that's the end of the video. But supposedly, this is Ukrainian forces moving into the area of Chasiv Yar, but we don't really know for certain. It seems that there is some questions being thrown in, and if we go back and look, it is true, we don't see any armbands on these guys. And considering that they're near the front, we always see green or yellow armbands, and none of these guys have one on them. And considering that Russian equipment sometimes looks so similar to Ukrainian equipment, it's very hard to distinguish the two. We don't really know if these guys are really Russian or Ukrainian. So this may be another attempt at disinformation and something that we have seen the Russians do before in the area of Mariupol. And so we're now going to be moving on from that clip and on into the southern area of Bakhmut in the area of Klishkivka, where we saw another T-84 upload. These things are just really cool looking. I think they're one of the best looking tanks that came out of the upgraded Soviet era T-series tanks, and it's great to know that the Ukrainians are still using these and that we're seeing some in the area of Bakhmut right now. Hopefully, they're able to blast the Russian forces around a little bit during the defense or during the withdrawal into new defensive positions. But still, I think this thing looks incredibly neat. Now, Matthew, I know you're probably quite busy, but what do you think of the T-84 Uplu?
I think from this one picture I see right here, it looks pretty nice.
It does look pretty nice. I would have.
What is that red deal on the front, if you haven't already said?
It's some kind of a missile jamming system for an anti-tank guided missile. It's a first generation system, so it actually doesn't work against modern anti-tank guided missiles. A Stugna would not be affected by those. It would just hit its target directly. But it also, interestingly enough, allows for the turret to automatically be controlled. If it gets lased, which means that a laser rangefinder or a laser sight hits it, it will turn the entire turret in the direction of where that laser came from. It'll fire off a round directly at the source of the laser, and then one a little bit to the left of the laser, and then one a little bit to the right of the laser, so that way they hit the position where the ATGM is, and then they also take out the crew if it's trying to withdraw either to the left or the right.
Interesting. Would you say this is the Leopard is a more effective tank?
The Leopard is a more effective tank because under all of this upgraded equipment, it is still just a T-80. They're fairly old. They're not that competent compared to a Western tank. So, you know, it is what it is. It's great. It's great, especially compared to a base model T-80B or a T-72A, but it's still not going to compare to anything like a Leopard 2A4, Leopard 2A6, or an M1 Abrams or a Challenger.
Interesting.
I would agree with you. Indeed. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from the Klishchiivka news and the Bakhmut news in general, and now it's time for us to move on behind the lines and into Luhansk, because our boy Girkin has been crying a storm. And I know it's Girkin. I'm going to make fun of him because he's goofy for even siding with the Russians, and now he's going on a rant again about how the Russians suck and how he doesn't really want to be a part of their team anymore. So here's the video. Enjoy. It is fun. Russian seething. Russian crying is heavily prevalent. If you don't want to see this for much longer, make sure to help this war end sooner by supporting tonight's fundraiser for Doctors Without Borders. A merciless plug, but let's get right into the video.
Общая ситуация, ну, вы ее сами видите. Ну, если вас интересует как бы общая ситуация, я ее оцениваю именно так. То есть так же, как и пишу у себя на ресурсах. То есть мы влезли в очередное болото, вот, и опять в нем стоим и непонятно чего ждем. То есть так же, как в 2014 году наша власть сделала шаги, которые не просчитала.
Man, this guy has always been the white knight of the Russians. He's always just known that they're overstepping their bounds and doing things wrong. Why in the world would he have even sided with them if he had seen that they were doing everything wrong in 2014? That's when this all started. That's when he got involved in it. Why would he still have been there? Why wouldn't he have defected? All this just doesn't make much sense to me. I think he's trying to save face because he knows eventually the drum trials will reach him, and he doesn't want to be on, I guess you could say, the gallows for what he's done, and so he's trying to make himself look like a better person.
Другого результата, а когда результат оказался, мягко говоря, печально, они просто опять же застыли и ждут. Вот. Осенью были предприняты меры, чтобы не потерпеть быстрого поражения, чтобы достичь паритета, по крайней мере, в людях на фронте с противником.
He's so freaking quiet, good lord.
Паритет этот возник, как только ситуация стабилизировалась, сразу все снова поставили на тормоз, и в надежде, что как-нибудь само собой образуется.
With the hope it somehow sorts itself out, it still really hasn't.
И втюхивает наше население активнейшим образом. На предмет того, что ребята, значит, Украина вот-вот рухнет, в общем-то, там никаких новых мобилизаций.
Is somebody getting rassled in the back corner or something?
His co-host back there is getting choked. He's going, "Don't tell him the blitz." He's sitting here giving the interview at the same time.
Like he's telling him, go away with that wrestling. Go away.
He's like, get it out of here.
Но этого, конечно, не будет. Хотя бы потому, что наша армия в общем и целом к наступлению оказывается не готова.
we can tell, it really takes a lot for them to even take one town.
По всем параметрам. Просто по всем параметрам. Начиная от обеспечения боеприпасами, с которым не буду вдаваться в подробности, но не очень хорошо, скажем так. Да, средства связи, в общем-то, тоже по-прежнему полный занятость с точки зрения обеспечения войск на фронте. Управление войсками отвратительное в этой жизни.
Lack of communication. He just has it all figured out. How come he hasn't fixed it?
Очень слабое. Господства в воздухе как не было, так и нет. То есть вообще нет. Фактически противник перебрасывает свои части и соединения вблизи фронта, в колоннах, не опасаясь вообще ничего. Только там может под обстрел попасть, если засекли там.
And their aviation is practically not functioning. I wonder why. It's not like they were blown away in Crimea.
Просто из-за того, что не подлететь к линии фронта там. Ну, в отдельных случаях, конечно, ее используют, и даже что-то она там поражает. Но фактически наша авиация не может обеспечить.
It's not able to establish isolation. Like he doesn't even understand the main problem with the Russian Air Force is that they weren't able to destroy the surface-to-air missile defense systems, the most modern ones at the onset of the war, due to outdated information, which left them at a severe disadvantage in the opening phases, which led to high losses and the eventual, I guess you could say, phasing out of the use of the Russian Air Force at all. And he's not even getting that either. He's trying to make it sound like the Russian Air Force is just not being active enough. If they were, they'd just get shot down. I don't think he gets it. I mean, this guy, especially with his background, should know a thing or two about surface-to-air missiles and air defense, considering that he is the guy who shot down a commercial airliner over Ukraine and killed hundreds of civilians under his orders. You would think he would know about something like that, but he's not even mentioning it.
Его войска подхода резервов. Именно поэтому сражение за Бахмут, за Солидар и все прочее протекает вот в таком вот вязком виде. То есть противник захотел...
Scott KC2Cat said, I bet he likes to play hide the Girkin.
Снабжение боеприпасами, снабжение горючим, и вот так вот медленно.
Man, he's so freaking quiet. If y'all can't hear him, I can't even hear him hardly.
Там говорят, что противник теряет больше, чем мы в ходе этих действий. Ну, я, например...
I doubt it too, because if they were taking as many casualties as the Russians, they would have already lost.
Ну, опять же, я выражаю сомнения, просто не исходя из там опыта, который у меня нет сейчас, а исходя из общих теоретических постановок. Поле более не изолировано, противник маневрирует резервами, противник не контратакует, а если контратакует, только частные какие-то контратаки, чисто местные. А наши все время наступают. А наступление это, простите, это надо...
Advancing means coming out and running to the enemy. There we have it. There we have it. The summary of warfare forever. Advancing is getting up and running to the enemy. Yeah, that's what an advance is. I would really be shocked if the enemy was running towards you in an advance. I think that's more of a defense, but we'll let that slide.
У противника тоже есть артиллерия, она тоже стреляет. Допустим, миномет. Боеприпасов у них минометом достаточно.
Man, that window is just getting more and more closer to him each day. Each time he runs a video, there's a window getting a little closer.
Разгромить без новой волны мобилизации, причем не только людей, но и тыла, разгромить Украину мы не сможем. А если мы не сможем ее разгромить, то либо вот линия фронта вот так и будет, как сейчас, с локальными операциями по очищению каких-то районов, либо наши могут предпринять от большого ума большое наступление. Ну, я, честно говоря, скептически отношусь к его, к тому, что оно закончится успешно. И лучше бы его не предпринимать. Вот так вот. Вот примерно понимая состояние наших войск, я понимаю, что наши войска могут обороняться, могут где-то локально атаковать.
This guy's quiet.
Потому что может получиться даже...
Everyone's saying notice he's on the ground floor. Very interesting observation. If they threw him out the window, he wouldn't fall far. That means that he would probably accidentally commit suicide by 2 bullets to the side of the head or something, but You know, we can't get that creative. The Russians will come up with something, you know. They'll probably poison them. So that's the end of the video. But you can see the Girkin's still crying. He's whining. He's not happy. It's like, if you're not happy, why did you join their side? You're a little stupid. But anyways, we're now moving out of the Bakhmut area and Luhansk, and we're now moving into the area of Donetsk, where we saw in the area of Novoselivka Druha an interview with a HIMARS crew, or as they call it, la 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 la. And the music is going. We can see that they started out the interview with an M777, which is not a HIMARS. We can see them giving us some beautiful shots of this man smoking. I was going to save the artillery piece, and then it went to him. We now see them reloading the piece. You see them firing it with a camo net over the piece. Very nice. We can see them now packing up the piece and getting ready to ship it. Call sign Raccoon. On average, it's difficult to say because every day is different in terms of the tactical situation. But from 20 to 30 to 100 to 120 shots, though haven't done 100 in a while. The Americans did not know it could fire so much. We fire significantly more shells than they ever did. I'll say this. People do get tired, and as you probably understand, these are rather Spartan conditions. They grumble. On some days, they moan. But the morale is such that if a command comes for a counteroffensive, those in hospitals will get up and go. Now see them aiming the M777 again. Generally, the situation hasn't changed. There are more difficult days. Days with relative quietness. There were days when we felt we suppressed their long-range artillery and it was much quieter. As I understand, they brought up now some reinforcements, but the situation in the past week and month has generally not changed. On a day with good visibility, we work with the support of a drone. But at night, we work at planned targets. Every target has a cost. We're beating them. Orcs are satisfied with our work. They never come back to customer service. And that's the end of the clip. But there's an interview with an M777 crew. I don't know why it said HIMARS in the title. I thought it would eventually get around to it, but it was just an M777 crew. We're now going to be moving on from that bit of news and into the area of Avdiivka, where we saw a Russian soldier get hit by a switchblade. And this guy was one... Oh, it's been marked as NSFW now. Shh.
Oh, no.
I was never going to show that on stream, y'all, but if y'all want to see it, click on the link in the description below for the Day 348 map, and you'll find it right there. We're now moving on out of the Donetsk area, because that was all the news we had to report from there. Of course, no frontline advances being made, and now we're moving down into the Zaporizhzhia area, where there has been some action, to say the least. There have been 5 different bits of news down here, so let's get into them. Starting off in Volodar, we saw another Russian tank get destroyed. We're going to mute that. When you see the Russian tank on the move, and we now see the crew bailing out, and that's the end of that tank's nice life. Have a nice life! But anyways, that's the end of that clip. Another Russian tank destroyed in the Volodar area. We're now moving on into the next clip of news, somewhere in the general direction, where we saw this odd MTLB captured. Now, what's odd about this MTLB? Well, it has a naval gun on it. A 2M7. This is a little bizarre, because you see these things on ships. You don't really see them on MTLBs like these. So, fairly bizarre indeed. And we can see that they captured another one in the Volodar area today. Very nice. And I hope they keep it up. We're now moving on from this little bit of news, and we're going to be moving further down the line and out of the Volodar area, because while the attacks are still continuing there, it appears the Russians are making no ground, and they're also still crying, and they can keep on. We're now moving into the area of Neskuchne, I almost said that wrong, where we saw a Russian getting hit today in this area as well. We can see them running around in their trenches, bleed, gathering up, and the artillery hits them dead on, and we can see something go flying. Well, we're not going back, though. If you didn't see it, you didn't see it. We can see more artillery hitting them, and they're not having a fun time. They're taking quite some losses. We're now moving on from this little bit of news. Very nice to see. And we're now moving even further down the line, and past the area of Vielka, Novosilka, and on down into the area of Malinivka, where we saw a Russian SPG get absolutely slammed today, like they were putting back vodka shots, but better. We can see that they hid it under their trash pile, because that is only normal for the Russians. You can see it sitting right there, and we can hear the country music playing fairly well. That is Ukrainian country music. You can see the...
I like how they're embracing their, like, trashy, like, military lifestyle by just, like, covering it with trash.
Yeah, they're like, let's live in the trash pile, bleed. And now we can see that the trash pile has been mixed up a little bit by the artillery. We now see the smoke rising off of the SPG. It's a mix of white and black smoke, showing that there's some kind of artillery, well, ammunition fire going on in there, and the tank has also been damaged enough that it's burning internally. You see it continuing to smoke and burn.
I guess you could say they took out the trash.
Call
such a good one.
Call it a dumpster fire, because this thing's burning trash. But with that, we're now going to be moving on from this little clip. Nice to see that they took out another 2S1, and we're now moving even further down and on into our last bit of news in the Zaporizhia area near Kharkiv, where we saw a drone hitting 3 soldiers. Oh, we gotta mute this because that's that melancholic 80s stereotype beat. We can now see this thing flying near the tree line, flying into the tree line, and then flying into the Russians. Oh. Oh, it paused. Oh, no. Speed forward a little bit. You can see it flying in again. You see it going straight for the Russians. We can see him right there. Oh, bliet. Oh! Oh, it hit the tree! And it got him too. Oh, man, what a shot. Look at this again. Look at this. Ooh, there was 3 of them. There was the 3 of them. I didn't see them in the last clip, but we saw them there. 3 Russians taken out by a single drone. That is quite cost-effective, I would say. And so with that, we're now
also, shout out to Nicholas Conder for putting in a 250 Canadian. And also, real quick, we're at $9.8 thousand on the fundraiser. We're only 200 away.
Man, 9.8. If only we could make it to 10K. I know we can. I know we can do it. And I feel like tonight, I would call a general order, but I feel like tonight, the Lee Spring Army's willpower alone will get us to that $10,000 goal. So, who's going to do it? Who's going to get us to the $10,000 mark? So many of y'all, hundreds of y'all have helped out this fundraiser tonight, donating, supporting, and getting us this close. But which one of you? Which group of y'all will get us on to 10K? We are just that close. $131 away at this exact moment. It is just a stepping stone away compared to how far the Lee Spring Army's come. And I know that we can reach the second goal that's been set for tonight, because we've reached the first one with flying colors. We're now going to be moving on out of this Zaporizhia news, and I'm going to be talking to y'all for a second about what the Russian plans will most likely be with what's occurring in Bakhmut, and if they succeed. So, we know that the Russians are going to most likely be attempting to encircle Bakhmut around Chasiv Yar and Krasna Hora, which it appears that they've almost done. If this does appear to be the case here in the future, the Ukrainians will retreat out of Bakhmut, setting up a defensive position in Chasiv Yar and Konstantinivka, because the Russians will most likely be trying to hop onto the T-0504 and then pretty much ride or move down that highway into Konstantinivka or around Konstantinivka. We know that the Russians will... Hey! We did it!
We hit the goal!
We did it! We reached a $10,000 goal. All the way! All the way! Let's go! And now we're going well over 10,000 for sure. And I gotta thank every single one of y'all who's helped out with that tonight. If it wasn't for all of the combined efforts of every single soldier in the Lee Spring Army, we would have never reached the $7.5 thousand goal. We would have never reached the $10,000 goal. Now it looks like we're going well over 10,000 and towards 11. We won't be raising the goal again tonight because $10,000 is incredible, and I can't ask any more of y'all. Y'all have definitely blown through my expectations for tonight's fundraiser, and probably all of y'all's as well. I don't think anyone expected to get this high tonight, and yet we did. That actually sounded wrong out of context. No one clipped that. But anyways, thank you all so much once again for supporting Doctors Without Borders. I'm sure that $10,000 is going to go to help save many countless lives of the Ukrainian citizens who have been nearly mortally wounded or mortally wounded, and due to Doctors Without Borders, their lives will be saved. And so with that, it's now time for us to move on out of the Bakhmut area and on up into Kyiv to cover the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 348 of the war. And so, without further ado, here's the speech.
Бажаю здоров'я, шановні українці. Сьогодні є ще один санкційний крок нашої держави проти держави-терориста. Введено в дію рішення Ради національної безпеки і оборони щодо санкцій проти атомної галузі Росії. Це не останнє рішення щодо цієї їхньої галузі. Сенс наших кроків також і в тому, щоб підтримати зусилля наших дипломатів по розширенню глобальних санкцій на цю частину російської машини агресії. Росія – це єдина держава у світі, яка дозволяє своїм військовим обстрілювати атомні станції та використовувати АЕС як прикриття для обстрілів. Російські ракети неодноразово йшли за траєкторіями над ядерними об'єктами України. Також держава-терорист використовує атомну галузь як один з елементів зовнішньої експансії для тиску на інші держави, для створення відповідних загроз суверенітету інших держав. Все це достатні причини, щоб і атомна галузь Росії була під глобальними санкціями. Ми працюємо над цим з нашими партнерами. Продовжуємо також і дипломатичний марафон для того, щоб не допустити використання Кремлем світового спорту та олімпійського руху для своєї пропаганди. Представникам держави-терориста не місце на Олімпіаді та міжнародних турнірах. Україною направлені відповідні листи компаніям, які найбільше підтримують Міжнародний олімпійський комітет. Це великі міжнародні компанії, які точно зацікавлені в тому, щоб їхню репутацію, підтримку не використовували заради пропаганди війни. Вже почалась наша підготовка до подій нового тижня. Він може стати доволі вагомим. Готуємо рішення, переговори, які мають посилити наших воїнів, які мають дати Україні більше міжнародної підтримки, більше зброї. Заплановані як публічні, так і непублічні формати роботи. Хочу зараз окремо подякувати тим, хто задіяний в ліквідації наслідків енергетичної аварії в Одеській області. Відновлювальні роботи тривають цілодобово. Станом на цей час без електропостачання сотні тисяч людей в Одеському регіоні. І, звичайно, до російського терору таких проблем з електрикою на Одещині і в інших регіонах держави, в принципі, не могло б бути. Зараз для забезпечення нормальної роботи енергосистеми потрібні надзвичайні зусилля. Дякую енергетикам, ремонтникам, посадовцям, кожній, хто працює, щоб відновити нормальні технічні можливості постачання електрики та щоб зберегти нашу генерацію. До речі, за підсумками цього тижня ми маємо деякі важливі домовленості з партнерами для енергетики. Зокрема, Євросоюз готовий підтримати Україну постачанням електрики. Дякую партнерам за це. Нарощуємо співпрацю і в постачанні енергообладнання. Також маємо надзвичайно успішні приклади в енергозберігаючих ініціативах. Приміром, тільки за один цей тиждень люди вже отримали перший мільйон LED-ламп в обмін на енергозатратні лампи розжарювання. Більше 800 тисяч заявок за цією програмою вже є у дії, тобто це максимально зручно. Коли ми повністю реалізуємо програму, а це 30 мільйонів LED-ламп, це дасть помітну економію споживання. Я дякую пані президентці Єврокомісії, пані Урсулі фон дер Ляєн за підтримку цієї ініціативи. Окремо по фронту вже є багато повідомлень про те, що окупанти хочуть зробити у лютому щось символічне, спробувати відігратись за їхні минулорічні поразки. Ми бачимо цей збільшений тиск на різних напрямках фронту, а також тиск в інформаційному полі. Дуже тяжко на Донеччині, запеклі бої, але як би не було тяжко, та яким би не був тиск, ми маємо вистояти. Маємо використовувати і використаємо кожен день, кожен тиждень, щоб посилювати наш захист на фронті, щоб зміцнювати наші міжнародні позиції, щоб збільшувати тиск на Росію і давати нашим людям нові можливості пройти цей важкий час. У нас немає іншої альтернативи, ніж захиститися і перемогти. Я дякую кожній, хто зосереджений на зміцненні держави. Дякую всім, хто воює за Україну. Дякую всім, хто допомагає нашій державі. Слава Україні!
And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky, and that wraps out our day 348 news summary and also the news segment for the night. We're about to be moving into the question segment where we're going to address as many live chats as we can and also call out all of the top donors on tonight's fundraiser. But tonight has been absolutely unbelievable. Over the course of an hour and 42 minutes, this channel has been able to raise well over $10,000 in support of Doctors Without Borders. I've got to thank every single person who's contributed to tonight's fundraiser and helped us to get to this point, because it is unbelievable to think that 348 days after this war started, 348 days after this channel aired its first live stream about the news of the war going on in Ukraine, we have still been able to not only exceed fundraiser goals, but blow over the second ones that we set that night as well. We started off tonight with a $7,500 fundraiser goal. Y'all got over that so quickly that we had to raise it to $10,000, and we've not even... and not only did we get to $10,000, we've gotten well over $10,000. We're probably well on our way to $11,000 right now. And I've got to thank every single one of y'all again. All of our massive donors like Mark Slava Ukraini, Miss Disa, Dutch Arjen, along with everyone else, y'all have done a terrific job. Absolutely unbelievable. And if we add this to all the fundraisers we've done over the course of this war, we've raised nearly $762,000, I believe. If I go back and add them all together, like the 50 or so fundraisers we've run, they'll be adding up to around $762,000. Nothing to scoff at all. And we are well on the way to finally raising $1 million total in support of Ukraine. And so, with that, I've got to thank every single one of y'all so much once again for contributing to tonight's fundraiser, helping us to help Ukraine once again. And I know that the people over in Ukraine that will be receiving life-saving surgery and help from Doctors Without Borders will be incredibly appreciative to both the Lee Spring Army and everyone else who's been watching tonight. And so thank you all so much once again for supporting the fundraiser. And with that, it's now time for us to recognize all of the donors, the top donors that have made this possible tonight. But before we even get to it, I always want to make sure that we thank all of the people who sent in smaller amounts of support that will not get called out. The reason why we do not call everyone out is because due to the nature of these fundraisers, countless hundreds, if not thousands of people donate to these fundraisers. And if we tried to call all of y'all out, we physically wouldn't have the time to do it. But I want y'all to know that while we can't call out y'all's names, y'all are as important as the top donors as well. And I've got to thank y'all for all of the effort y'all have thrown in and all of the care y'all have to even support a fundraiser. It means a lot to me that everyone helps these out, because this is, of course, the culmination of all of our work every single week, is to get to these fundraisers and help to save Ukrainian lives and help out the Ukrainian people in their struggle to remain an independent and sovereign country. And so thank you to everyone once again. And let's hear those top donors real quick, Matthew, so that way we can recognize some of the people who have made tonight's fundraiser possible.
All right, so for our final question segment, it's now time to call them out.
Call them out. Call them out.
So the first person we're calling out is Nicholas Conder, who puts in a $250 donation. And thank you very much for that generosity. Along with Raphael Schneeves, who puts in a $150. Then we have a $100 from Gonzalez Guns. Then we have one from McNoodle, Richard Rohde, Enforcer for President, Hal Rose. And we have a $50 from Scott PGH, Freedom Principle, Michael Grobman, John Luke Sills, Barb Moody, Sturmuir, Rumpelstiltskin, and Pavan Allman. And those are the top donors for now. And thank you very much to all of you, not just the top donors, like Enforcer was saying, to everyone, because we couldn't reach 10,000 without all of your support. So Enforcer, what say you about all this good support?
I've got to say, it is absolutely impressive. I've already gushed about how we've been able to do this tonight and how it's unbelievable. But once again, I've got to thank you all so much. It blows me away that not only have you all helped out these fundraisers so much and helped us to get them to unbelievable heights. I've never seen a channel out there rather than Mr. Beast that's been able to do this much to help out the Ukrainians, and he did that on his philanthropy channel. I've never seen anyone do this, and it's all thanks to y'all. We couldn't have done this on our own. The Lee Spring Army is our, I guess you could say, our right arm, or both of our arms, pretty much, in terms of getting anything done. And I've got to thank y'all for helping out this fundraiser as much as y'all have. I can't believe it. And so with that, we're now moving on from that and on into our polls, because Matthew, of course, has been throwing up those absolutely killer polls, and we've got to get into them and see what people are thinking. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
And I have to say, I'm proud of the fact I've gotten to the point where I can actually still run polls almost normally on fundraiser night, because I'm so overwhelmed. Typically, I can't, but I've gotten to where I can go 100 miles an hour and get to it, because I love doing the polls. But the very first one we have says, do you believe Bakhmut will be held by Ukraine, or is it about to become a loss? It looks like 53% said it will sadly become a loss very soon, 28% said unsure, and 20% said Ukraine will hold it. It's a fortress. And I have a suspicion that sadly it will become a loss soon. But like the Enforcer was saying earlier, it really has no strategic importance, rather than the fact the Russians simply want to take it to have I guess, a quick victory to claim that they've done something. But Enforcer, what say you?
It, in my opinion, appears that the situation is becoming incredibly serious, especially considering that the Russians have been able to complete their, I guess you could say, claws of the encirclement in the area of Klishkivka and also Krasna Hora. This is starting to become a very critical situation, and one that is somewhat concerning. Seeing this, and most likely knowing that the Ukrainians also realize this, and the vital supply lines, the arteries of their defense of the city, are almost within grasp of Russian armed forces right now, they will probably start to conduct a withdrawal from the city and try and stay there as long as they can to inflict as many losses on the Russians before they move to the next line of defenses. Beyond that, however, they've done an amazing job. It doesn't have any strategic value as an actual town. It is not the launching board for any further offensives that will actually have any kind of merit or impact on the war. And so the fact that they've been able to keep the Russians here in the city and force them to lose tens of thousands of soldiers and tens of thousands wounded, hundreds of tanks, almost 1,000 armored personnel carriers, those kinds of losses are something that the Russians cannot recover going further on into the war, and they lost all of this for a town that is not going to change the situation that they are facing right now in Ukraine. And so I believe entirely that while the Ukrainians will be retreating from this town, it was a strategic victory for the Ukrainians and a tactical defeat for the Russians. Or if you wanted to phrase it another way, it's a Pyrrhic victory for the Russians and a strategic victory for the Ukrainians, but I guess you could say a tactical defeat on another end. So with that, I hope we addressed that poll fairly well, and with that, we are on to the next one.
And for the next poll, we have a slightly different question. This one says, should Ukraine strategically retreat from Bakhmut now, or continue to take losses to defend it? It looks like 48% said retreat only when it's a last resort, 34% said strategically retreat right now, 13% said unsure, and 4% said no, don't leave until the last man is left. And I will say one option I definitely wouldn't go with is that last one. There's no need to martyr Ukrainian soldiers over Bakhmut. It's not important enough to do that. So I would say retreat only when it's a last resort. I'm not sure if it's really necessary to retreat right this second, because I don't think they're in that bad of a spot yet. But Enforcer, what say you about this slightly different question?
Retreating should be an option of last resort. If the position is still tenable and you could still inflict losses from it, the position should be held as long as they aren't threatened with encirclement. If encirclement becomes imminent, they must retreat immediately. So I believe that retreat should be viewed as an option of last resort. You never want to give up land when there's still opportunity to be found on it. And to tell you all how I view land, here's how a unit's position should be looked at, well, at least in my opinion. Let's say there's a Ukrainian squad right here, where my mouse cursor is, and they're looking over this area. Now, the Russians are advancing right onto it and over to the side of it, and as long as they're able to look over this ridge and fire down into that field and take out dozens of Russians, if not hundreds of Russians over the course of several weeks, there's no reason to give up that position, because down in this area around Klishkivka, the Russians are moving through the forest. But if the Russians start to move here, north behind them, that's time for them to move from this position, because at that point encirclement will most likely become imminent. They will eventually run out of ammo and be forced to surrender or be completely destroyed, and that is not a smart move to make, and that is an unnecessary expense of lives, manpower, and equipment. So that's how retreats should be conducted. They shouldn't be done hastily. You should try and sit there for as long as you can, inflict as many losses as possible, and then once it appears that it will become inevitable, if action is not taken at that moment, that there will be an encirclement or the forces will be destroyed, then pull them out and move them into another position like Ivanivsky, Chasiv Yar, or even further down the road in Konstantinivka. But with that, I hope we addressed that poll fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and the third and final poll says, rumors are circulating regarding who will replace Putin if he were ousted and or assassinated. What is your best guess? It looks like the most popular option is 33%, which says a Russian intelligence chief, followed up by 31% that said Dmitry Medvedev, and then 21% said Yevgeny Prigozhin, and 14% said a Russian political outsider. On this one, I don't think a Russian political outsider will have a chance unless there is some kind of uprising amongst the citizens. I'm not sure if that is very likely. So I'm going to go with a Russian intelligence chief. Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner, I'm not really sure if he really has a chance, to be totally honest. Medvedev, he's in the government. He might have a chance, but I'm still going to say go with the 33% option. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that Medvedev, out of all of those options, probably has the most likely chance of becoming Putin's successor. He is currently the prime minister of the Russian Federation. Vladimir Putin is the president. And so by positions of importance, he would be the next one in line, so I think he would probably be the one. But once again, that is on the surface, and just because you are second highest position in the Russian government doesn't mean anything at the end of the day. They could, a new person to lead the country could come from really anywhere. Stalin was the general secretary, which was one of the least important positions in the communist government when Lenin died, but due to his position being the general secretary, he worked it fairly well to eventually become the premier of the Soviet Union, although he maintained the title and position of general secretary. So that is something that I would say is important to note, is that while it seems straightforward that Medvedev would be the guy to take Putin's position if he was killed, died, or was ousted, it may not happen. It rarely ever happens that way. Like, for example, even after Stalin died, Khrushchev was the highly unlikely option amongst them all, but he ended up becoming the one because everything else just fell apart. Like, Laurent Beria was actually the guy who was most likely going to become the next leader of the Soviet Union at that point after Stalin had died. But he had made himself a fairly large amount of enemies within the Soviet government. And so a lot of them united just to make sure that he would get killed. And also, that guy was a grapist. And I know we can't say the other word because of YouTube censors, but the guy would grape small girls that were around 14 and 13 years old. So he was a pretty sick guy, and it's a good thing he got his head blown off. But moving on from that, because that's really more of a side note. They could come from anywhere. So I'm going to put my bets right now on Medvedev, but it may be some guy we've never really even heard about that's just deeply entrenched inside of the Russian governmental system. So with that, we are on to the next one, but I hope we addressed that poll fairly well.
All right, and that was our last poll. And real quick, shout out to Eagle Anderson, who puts in a 200 NOK donation to the fundraiser.
Norwegian
and
kroner.
I believe that is Norwegian kroner. Yeah, I forgot what it was, so I just said NOK. But anyways, moving on to our live chat questions, because that was our last poll, as I said a second ago, and repeated it one more time. This question goes to Enoch, who says, Matt and Enforcer, how do you guys feel about Russia taking more Ukraine real estate? And what's the solution to stopping the war? And for me, I got to say that even though they might take a little bit more land, I wouldn't get too upset about that because they are going to take some. It's just a given. But Ukraine will bounce back and eventually take the land for themselves once Russia is exhausted a little bit more. But the solution is to keep persisting, in my opinion. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that it's not that concerning to me. Obviously, every once in a while, if the Russians dedicate tens of thousands dead and hundreds of tanks lost and thousands of APCs lost, they will eventually take some kind of ground somewhere. It's not that big of a deal to me because over the course of the war, if we go from the height of Russian territory Ukrainian territory that was occupied, which are the areas in green, and some of these haven't even been filled out all too well because pretty much everything in the north was green except for Chernihiv. Chernihiv was still controlled by the Ukrainians and was mostly besieged. It shows that they've lost most of their land, half of their land that they had during this war already. And so the fact that the Russians are able to take one town, Bakhmut, which really is of no importance or even a significant town in size, it's not that concerning to me, and it's just a defeat. You can lose most of the battles in a war and still end up winning the war, and the Ukrainians have actually ended up winning a large amount of the battles after the opening phases of the war. So this is just an unfortunate defeat in the books of Ukraine. If they do retreat out of the town, the Russians will have officially won the battle, but it's more of a Pyrrhic victory because they've lost so many forces the win wasn't even worth it. It in fact was a massive loss for them. So that's my opinion on the Russians gaining ground and the way this war will most likely end. I've got to be honest with y'all, I'm thinking that my mid to late summer window may have been off, and this war may drag on much farther than mid to late summer. We may see it
years.
Going well on into the winter of this year, or maybe even on into next year. I'm not really sure at this point. But I'm still going to say that the mid to late summer window is what we're looking at, although I feel like it's unrealistic at this point. We'll probably revisit it and try and revise that here in the future. But I think that it'll just have to end by still committing a war of attrition against the Russians, whittling down their armored forces and their support, racking up the kills against Russian infantry, and then eventually, after wringing them dry of offensive power, the Russians will become nothing more than a defensive force, and then they can start pushing them back out of the country, back through Melitopol, through the south, Mariupol, Donetsk, Luhansk, and then into Crimea, and retake that as well. And so with that, I hope that addresses that question, and honestly, I don't find the loss of land, especially the small amount that we're seeing, to be of great concern. So with that, we are on to the next one.
And speaking of which, I think at this point, I think the war is going to last for probably several more years, because with the way we're arming Ukraine with tanks and maybe jets in the future, and Russia is going to keep calling up civilians to serve in the military, I think it's set up to last many more years. I don't think it can end this year. I don't think.
I don't know really. I want to be optimistic, and I want to say that they will be able to end this war at some point in this year. But as it keeps on dragging on, the Russians are somehow just dragging the dead corpse of their army a little bit further each day. It seems as though that will become a little bit more unlikely. The Ukrainians are most likely going to have to end up killing hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers before this war really ends. This war will probably be more deadly for the Russians than the Winter War was for the Soviets. And that's just looking at the figures right now, and we don't even know how much higher those will get as we go into the next months. So with that, I hope that addresses that fairly well, and we're on to the next one.
All right. And also, thank you, James Bond, and good night to you as well. And let's see here. We have a question now from Wacky, who says, what do you think of the oligarch buying an airport in Germany?
I think that's probably just a business arrangement. A lot of people always get concerned that whenever foreign powers or people, I guess you could say, that are a part of a foreign power buy anything, that's somehow going to screw up the national economy. Here's what's going to happen. That guy's going to buy the airport. He's going to make some profits off the airport. And if he tried to shut it down, because I know that's what the question is inferring, is that he will probably be able to shut down this airport and cause economic damage to the Germans. He shuts down the airport for about 16 hours. The German government makes a emergency convening to talk about the situation. They seize the airport and all of the assets from him, and then it gets controlled by the German government until someone else buys it at an auction. That would most likely be the course of events. So rather than this guy trying to rack up a little bit of extra cash by owning this airport and getting the profits off of it, it's not going to end up being of a strategic concern or strategic importance to the Germans or to their detriment. So with that, I hope that answers that question fairly well. And that also, real quick, pertains to the Chinese land here in the United States, because that's something that I've heard before being brought up, is that the Chinese own farms now and that they're probably putting spyware and equipment on them near air bases. And if the US government was truly scared of that, the FBI could get a warrant to go out there, raid the farms, search everything with a search warrant. And if it comes back with nothing, then that is what it is. If they come back with something, then there's going to be a huge diplomatic incident because the Chinese are spying on U.S. military equipment and bases here inside of the United States. So, that kind of falls under the same category. And something that people don't get is that just because this property is owned by someone from another country, or it may be owned technically under another foreign power, that doesn't mean that that foreign power now has all wielding power over property that they own in another country. The United States or Germany can seize that property and do anything they want with it as long as they have proper justification for it. So that I hope that does answer that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Ellen Verbunt, who says, can Ukraine win without fighter jets?
Ukraine can win without fighter jets because they are able to lock down their airspace with surface-to-air missile systems incredibly well, and that's where most of their power projection comes from in the skies of Ukraine, is from their their surface-to-air missiles. The Air Force only helps out in filling in the gaps in those air defenses wherever they may exist, and also giving a small amount of frontline support to the Ukrainian armed forces. Although that is incredibly small, because much like the Ukrainians have very strong air defenses, the Russians also have some fairly decent air defenses as well. So it makes it really hard for both sides to exercise any kind of air power and use it effectively. So they probably could survive without an air force, but a proper well-equipped Air Force with enough equipment will definitely help them out. It wouldn't be to their detriment, it would definitely be to their benefit. So if they get some more weaponry, if they get some more equipment like F-16s, or if they get more MiG-29s from whatever countries still have them in Eastern Europe, that would definitely help them out. But if they lost their Air Force, it wouldn't be that much of a loss either. So with that, I hope that answers that question fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
Next we have a question from Avari Mendebratis, who says, what would you say is the physical fitness level of the average Ukrainian soldier, all types, against the typical United States soldier? Has their fitness impacted Ukrainian performance in battle?
I will say that from what we've seen, Ukrainian physical fitness standards have been drastically lowered in some instances, due to the urgency of the war and the need to mobilize as many men and women as possible. So we have seen in some instances the physical fitness requirements have been overlooked or drastically reduced to really get anyone into the armed forces, because we've seen quite some large people fighting on the Ukrainian side and the Russian side. So take that for what you will. So going off of that, we know that the physical fitness requirements are lower than the US's. We don't know by how much, because we don't actually have a metric to work off of some numbers and sheets. But the U.S. physical fitness requirements, although they've been dropped a little bit in recent years, they are higher from what we can tell. This has affected Ukrainian combat abilities a little bit, but it hasn't seemed to be much. Physical fitness is, of course, important in military service, but it seems as though as the war becomes more automated and more modernized, physical fitness and the ability to move quickly over vast amounts of ground on foot has become a little less important. And so that physical fitness by those means has started to diminish in importance. And I'm using a lot of big words tonight. I'm sorry about that. I don't know why. But it started to decrease in terms of its importance. And it seems to have not been that much of a deciding factor in how capable they've been. It seems as though the technology now is showing how much more capable the Ukrainians could be rather than fitness. But still, their fitness requirements appear to be lower. So with that, I hope that answers that question fairly well. And we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Joseph M. Sika, or Sika. He says, riddle me this. Why the hell didn't Russia commit all of their forces to taking Kyiv right away instead of fighting on 5 fronts? And that's a very good question.
That's a really good question. The reason why is because if the governmental seat had been taken and that was it, the Ukrainians could have just moved their capital into Lviv, or they could have just moved their government into Lviv, Kryvyi Rih, Odessa, anywhere else they wanted to, and the Russians would have had to start fighting there. And by that point, if they had just done one single push to Kyiv, the Ukrainians could have solidified their defenses in the south. They could have solidified their defenses across the rest of Ukraine. They could have started to contain the Russian push in this area, and also the density wouldn't have been that great. You couldn't have sent 220,000 guys straight to Kyiv. There's just not enough room and not enough land there to spread those guys out enough to make sure they wouldn't get killed. Remember the 40 to 50 mile long convoy. So you would have had probably the same number of forces you saw originally fighting for Kyiv, and the rest of the advances just wouldn't have occurred. On top of that, this is a bit of a matter of prestige. The Russians wanted to show, at least in the initial invasion, that they were able to pull off as advanced, I guess you could say, army-level maneuvers as the United States was able to pull off in the invasion of Iraq and in the Gulf War. Because conducting a one-pronged push into Kyiv, that's simple. Anyone can do that. And the Russians have done it before. They did it in Chechnya, and then they got slaughtered down there. But to pull off a 5-front advance, that is advanced. And they would show off national prestige about how advanced your military is, how capable they are, and with what the Russians thought they were being stacked up against at the beginning of the war, which was incompetent Ukrainians that wouldn't fight back. It would have made them look like they were an incredibly advanced and competent army, and something that NATO may not be able to stand in the way of in a conventional ground war, or at least it would have made public opinion turn in that direction. So that is probably the reason why we saw a 5-pronged advance and not a single 1-pronged advance going straight to Kyiv and capturing the capital. So with that, I hope we answered that question fairly well, and we are on into the next one.
All right, and up next we have a question from Gregory Burke, who says, why is Vladimir Putin still breathing? Ukraine does have snipers after all, and you mentioned them several times over the past few months. And I have to say, Gregory, in my opinion, Putin is a devil, but he is pretty skilled at his craft, which was spying, and he does know how to avoid assassination for the most part. But Enforcer, what say you? Blah, blah, blah.
I would say, I think that Putin is still breathing because no one's been able to get to him yet. Because if someone had been able to get to him, I assure you he wouldn't be breathing. And also keep in mind, he doesn't seem to go in public much anymore. He kind of keeps inside of the Kremlin, well within the buildings, not even near windows from what we can tell. And he also sits at incredibly long tables where no one can even get close to him inside of these rooms, inside of the buildings. So I would assume that snipers would be largely ineffective because they'd rarely ever be able to see him, and he doesn't travel outside of the walls of the Kremlin fortress enough that he could become a viable target. And remember, again, the Kremlin fortress is dated as a military concept, but those walls still pose a massive threat to a sniper because there's no way you can shoot over walls like that. They pretty much block line of sight into every single building within that compound. So with that, I hope that answers that question fairly well, and we are on to the next one. Also, you never really realize how unimpressive the Kremlin is in size until you see this person walking along it right here, and you see how poorly maintained the bottom of the foundation is. Like, that is terrible looking. It looks like no one's actually maintaining the wall.
It is terrible. But, I mean, to be fair, the White House also has a little bit of the same problem. Their grass is, like, dying in the front. And also they have bees flying around, too.
Let's go take a look
that
at
have cameras in them.
Yeah, true. The roaches, Matthew. The roaches and the cameras.
Oh, that's right, roaches.
Oh, yeah. Man, those roaches. That was crazy stuff. But let's take a look at the White House here. Let's see here. Dude, that grass is as green as it gets. I mean, that is the greenest grass I've ever seen right here.
Well, maybe in that picture, but when we were there, it was like dying up front.
Let's see here. Let's go to the ellipse. Let's look at... Well, no. Better yet. Let's go to the road in between... Oh, wait a minute. You can't take pictures on that one. Okay. Well, let's go to the ellipse, and let's take a look at the ellipse, because that's usually the part that looks malnourished and dead. Yeah, it's still malnourished and dead. Yeah, the ellipse is just screwed. Like, but the lawns of the White House itself, they're lush. But, oh my god, someone needs to get out here with a sprinkler system or something and start watering the ellipse. What the hell's happened to the grass? It's like random people. I wouldn't doubt it if the people of Washington, D.C. just chew the grass up. You know, because those, honestly, really, to be honest, I got to make a joke here. This is a joke applied equally to both sides, so we're keeping with the no politics rule. I think it's the politicians that are coming out of Congress and they go out to lunch and they just come to the ellipse and they eat the lawn. Because they got to keep those lips running, and even if no one's listening, the best way to do it is just eat some grass out of the ellipse. But anyways, we're going to be moving on. But yeah, the grass looks green here, and you can even see from space the grass on the ellipse is looking pretty bad. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, it's looking a little sketchy, I gotta say.
Yeah, and also, what the hell's this over here? Like, they just made this football goal-shaped thing over here. Why? Why? It looks terrible.
That's where the nuclear football is supposed to go.
Yeah,
goal.
Once you activate the codes inside the Oval Office over here, you just fling them out the window and try and throw them into the goal at the ellipse. But anyways, we're going to be moving on from this. Washington, D.C. is a really cool place, by the way. If y'all ever go there, make sure to take the chance to look at all the Smithsonian's. They are some of the best museums in the world, and they are, of course, free, which is very neat about American museums, that you can really go into any of them, and almost all of them are free. And that's something you don't see a lot in European countries. Although I will say, most European museums, in my opinion, are actually of a higher quality than normal American museums, but the Smithsonian's are world class. I don't think any museum even gets close to the level the Smithsonian's are at that I've been to, and I've been to some British ones. Well, no, take that back. The British Museum is better than the Smithsonian's because it has a lot of actual culture from around the world that you can see in there that's authentic. The Smithsonian's largely focused on American technology, progression, culture, such things like that, but they're still incredibly top-notch, world-class. I'd highly recommend, if you're into museums, you want to go see some top-notch ones, go to Washington, D.C., you won't be disappointed. But with that, I hope that addresses that fairly well, and also the whole thing about the White House lawn and how the grass doesn't look good. I don't even know how we got to that, but with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next, big shout out to JH for putting in a $50 donation. And let's see here. It looks like we are still somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000. I can't see the exact figure, but Jay, thank you very much for that generosity. And real quick, let's address the poll that's currently running. If NATO keeps supplying Ukraine and Russia keeps conscripting civilians, will this war last years? It looks like 49% said yes, it probably will, 16% said unsure, and 35% said no, it will end likely this year. Enforcer, would you like to comment again on that, or do you think we've covered it enough?
I think we've covered it well enough, so we'll just leave that one as it is, and it appears that it is actually a little bit contended there. But with that, we are on to the next question.
All right, and the next question goes to, let's see here, Bip, who says, Enforcer, when do you think we will see aircrafts from everywhere finally help Ukrainian soldiers?
Can you reread that one again real quick?
When do you think we'll see aircraft from everywhere finally help Ukrainian soldiers?
I think we'll probably see aircraft enter Ukraine and help out the Ukrainian Air Force probably within the next 3 to 4 months. I'm not really sure when we'll ever see that window occur. It appears that it's being waffled around as to whether we'll send Western aircraft or not. But the M1 Abrams was waffled around for quite a while as well, and it's now being sent in the future. So I would say, I'm not really sure, but I would suppose that it will at least be 4 months until we get any kind of real news on Western aircraft being sent to help out Ukraine. And so with that, I hope I answered that question fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Kim Buckles, who says, when Putin dies, by whatever cause, which countries do you think will send a representative to his funeral? Now, for me, I got to say, I think Winnie the Pooh will probably send Igor, and that'll probably be it. But what do you say?
Oh, man, you know, if Putin got killed or died, I think we would probably send, man, I'm trying to think of who we would send. I can't think of anyone from the United States that we would send for the funeral. I don't think anyone would attend it. I'm really being honest with y'all. I don't even think the Chinese would attend that funeral. I feel like no one would. I feel like that would be an entirely internal Russian affair, and you would see like Medvedev, Sergei, they would show up, but you wouldn't see anyone outside of Russia show up, except for a few. I feel that North Korea would probably make a special visit because, you know, they're stupid. You would probably also see Cuba make a special visit as well, but beyond those two, I bet almost everyone else would abstain from even showing up. So with that, I hope that answers that question fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one. You're right, Enigma. It most likely would be Kim Jong-un's sister. Also, that is something I get mixed up a lot too, Enigma, is Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-un. They ought to come up with more creative names than the same one for nearly 3 times in a row. I know they're trying to keep like the whole Kim dynasty thing going, but still, come on. Like, there's got to be some better names out there than just Kim.
It's like gonna be Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-drippy, Kim Jong no cap.
Kim Jong bussin'. But anyways, with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, shout out to Terrence Custer, who puts in a $50 donation, and we're up to 11,000. And thank you very much, Terrence. And let's see. I see everybody saying Satan's gonna show up.
Oh yeah, he would.
Probably so.
He would.
But anyways, up next we have a question from Portstan, who says, will any of the new long-distance rockets reach the Kerch Bridge?
Yes. We know that the Ukrainians apparently already have some kind of ordnance that can reach the bridge. We don't even know what it is anymore. Me and Starsky were fairly certain when it happened it was some kind of a missile. And then I think both of us kind of waffled on that position, and we started trying to pick out other stuff like the suicide boats or anything else. We do know that the longer range missiles that will be provided, like the ground-launched small diameter bombs, apparently do have the range to reach the bridge, at least based off of public numbers, but we don't know if those are accurate or not. It could have even longer range than we know of, or maybe a little bit shorter. So with that, I hope we answered that question fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next we have a question from Bill G, who says, in the case of the Leopard 1 and 2, why can they not be retrofitted with ERA defense?
ERA defense, explosive reactive armor. We largely, most countries have been moving away from explosive reactive armor, and they're moving towards composites. And I'll explain the evolution here of tank armor, and this will be a little long, so bear with me. I will show y'all this because this is probably the best one to show. The M60 main battle tank. One of the first times we tried to standardize our main battle tank force here in the United States was with this thing. And I've got to be honest with y'all, it's kind of ugly. But anyways, moving on from that, this uses rolled homogeneous armor only, and that was a huge problem because it started to become dated fairly quickly. Unlike the Leopard 1 in Germany, where no armor was the best armor, and that was their philosophy, we still worked off of a philosophy with the M60 that there had to be some kind of armor, and so it had a decent amount. But due to the, I guess you could say, the introduction of heat FS, which is a high explosive anti-tank fin stabilized round, and I'll show y'all one of those here. This is a heat FS round, high explosive fin stabilized anti-tank. These could pierce through rolled homogeneous armor like butter from any angle. Even if the armor was heavily angled, it will punch through. So this started to pose some problems, and there had to be something made to counter the heat FS rounds. So we started to try and find ways to do that with our M60. So then we came up with the M60, I believe it's the TTS. Let me see if okay, yeah. So, let me scroll through here. Let me try and find y'all one. This is actually an Israeli M60. It's called a Magak something. It's actually the Altai. I'll try and find y'all a better picture of it here. Oh God, come on, find me a better picture. Here we go. So, this one had explosive reactive armor. Oh, hang on. No, I'm going to go find a better picture because I think that may actually be composite. So let me go find an M60 with ERA on it. Here we go. Here's an M60 with ERA. Now the picture's small. Oh my God, this really... Okay, here we go. The Gulf War, the Marine Corps, the M60. Boom. You got the explosive reactive armor tiles on the sides. The reason why they use these explosive reactive armor tiles is because they can counter heat FS. the tiles are explosive. That is in the name. And whenever anything hits them hard enough, they explode away from the tank like a claymore. The theory behind it is that it will negate most of the power made by this heat FS shell. So once it blasts through the explosive armor firing back at it and stopping a lot of its forward momentum, by the time it hits the armor, it won't punch through. And that's the idea behind explosive reactive armor. Then everyone in the world started to use the hell out of this stuff, and heat FS started to become incredibly useless due to this, because you could just tack on as much ERA as you wanted, you could make it as thick as you wanted, and the tanks just became much safer because of that. So now we had to find a way to punch through the explosive reactive armor, and so then we came up with the APFSDS round, the APFSDS. This right here is literally a heavy metal dart that is about 120 millimeters in size. Well, it's not 120 millimeters in size. The casing it is in is, so you can see that right there. But the actual dart itself is incredibly small, very narrow, and it travels at an unbelievable speed. These things are incredibly fast. The purpose of that is that due to its small size, almost no explosive filler, and its velocity, it is able to punch through the explosive reactive armor. And by the time the explosive reactive armor goes off, it's already gone clean through it, and it wouldn't even be phased by explosive reactive armor. It'll go straight through the rolled homogeneous armor underneath, and into the tank, and then right out the other side. This became the armor-piercing round, or the anti-tank round, of a new age of tank warfare. And now we had to come up with a way to counter APFSDS. ERA was certainly not the way forward, because it was really only made to negate the damage from a heat FS round. So now we had to start building tanks with composite armor. And so then we ditched the M60 completely in US service, and we finally made the M1 Abrams, which I'll show you a picture of right here. And I don't think I can find an M1 Abrams. These are all M1A1s and M1A2s. But we made this. You'll see that while we still add explosive reactive armor on, that is mostly to protect the sides of the tank from RPGs and anti-tank guided missiles, which still largely use some kind of heat FS style explosive head to punch through armor. So that's generally what that's for. But the turret cheeks, the front glacis, things like that, they are now protected by composite armor, which is much stronger than explosive reactive armor in stopping an APFSDS shell, and also heat FS at the same time. So that is a good question. You could tack ERA on, but it's really only going to protect you against RPGs and similar other weapons, and it's really not going to protect you against other tanks when you find them on the field. And so with that, I hope that that very long explanation explains why it's good in some reasons to add ERA to it, not in others. And with that, I hope we answered that question fairly well. I hope you enjoyed that rabbit hole. And with that, we are on to the next one. Also, real quick, before we move on, though, there is a Challenger that supposedly, I forgot what it's called, the Challenger Black Knight. It was a testing bed of a tank. It was a real one, too. The British made it. And it had these neat little active protection system things on top of it. This never got injured real service. It was just a testing system. But these little things up here supposedly will aim directly at an anti-tank guided missile flying at it and fire off a small little charge that will blow up the anti-tank guided missile before it gets close to the tank, stopping the tank from being hit at all, which is really interesting, but we never saw it get off the drawing board and off the prototypes. So
do you know what BAE system stands for?
I don't know, actually, and I feel like you're about to set us up for a joke.
Badass equipment.
Oh, dude. Oh, well, that's actually a really good one. And also, man,
yeah.
remember when we were at Huntsville and we were hanging out outside of the base systems building, and the security guards saw us and they just turned around and walked back inside and did nothing?
Well, I think they called the police, but we got out there
yeah.
before they came.
We were trying to like get some kind of footage for a video we were trying to make about Huntsville, and then it never came together. But that's what we were doing, just in case of the FBI was like, what? That's what we were doing around the base systems building. So, anyways, with that, we are on to the next one. And also, by the way, everyone, we'll be answering questions on as long as we can until we reach 11:30 local time or 12:30 Eastern time. So with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And also, I did make a joke. I said it's a new era of armor. And then Philip Fiction says, boo. I have to admit, that was a 2. That was a 2 at the very best.
Listen.
Lucky to have a 2.
Listen, that was a 2. It wasn't that great,
I'll be honest, but it could be better. China is able to produce things that really outdo us. They build them out of corn on the cob, but it still looks good, and we gotta make something better. And so with that, we're on to the next one, but I hope we answered that fairly well. All right. So up next, we have a question from Raj.
I can't do it. It's
I
terrible.
was about to be like, oh, man.
But anyways, this question is from Raj Kapoor, who says, Enforcer, how much contacts do you think we have? Wait a minute, hold on. Let me reread that one. How much contact do you think the CIA has in the Kremlin?
I think that the CIA probably has some context in the criminal. Not criminal. Well, the criminal is probably the better explanation of the Kremlin. They probably have some contacts in the Kremlin, but probably not that many. You know, if you're talking about context that can really do anything, I would highly doubt it. Context that can give them information about what's going on inside the Kremlin, yes. So with that, I hope that answers the question as best as I can. I don't really know a lot about the CIA's operations or especially what they're doing involved with the Kremlin. So unfortunately, I can't really answer that one too well. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from C. Fay, who says, if Ukraine has numbers on the enemy, give or take 100 or so, why don't they just say their own numbers?
Wait a minute, read that one again. I think I may have misunderstood it.
If Ukraine has numbers on the enemy, give or take 100 or so, why don't they just say their own numbers? And they're talking about Ukraine's numbers on the Russians, I think.
I think they're talking about the losses. I'm not really sure. I'm not really understanding that question for some reason. So I think we'll have to skip over that one. But I do thank you for asking the question. Sadly, for some reason, there's a disconnect in between me understanding what it's supposed to mean and being able to answer. So I'm sorry about that. But with that, we were on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from, let's see. Philip Fixer said you had to talk with your hands to do Orange Man. I actually was trying to get into the whole character, but it went so south I had to stop. But anyways, the next question goes to Randy Stiles, who says, as far as tanks go now, first shot will win. Upgrades are good. Sounds like you dislike though, question mark.
Sounded you just like though, question mark.
Sounds like you dislike though, question mark.
Like though? I'm not, for what? Hang on, reread that one again.
It sounds like you dislike though, question mark.
Reread the line. Reread the whole thing. Reread the line. What happened?
As far as tanks go now, first shot will win. Upgrades are good. Sounds like you dislike though, question mark.
Upgrades are good. The first shot doesn't... Oh, the first shot always wins an engagement. Even back when tanks were first introduced into service, the first shot off would always win the engagement. But upgrades are incredibly important in helping the tank be able to get off that first shot in any given instance. So upgrades are incredibly important because those upgrades in the end allow that first shot to happen. So with that, I hope that does address that question fairly well. I have no reason why I didn't understand that all too well. I don't know what the hell happened there because I kept on hearing it. It sounded like Greek. Like, I don't know what it was. Anyways, we're on to the next
Call him out. Call him out.
Call him out. Call him out. I'm going to sit over here and I'm going to call him out. Whatever. Anyways, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Dr. Plush, who says, Enforcer, if Turkey would let it, could Ukraine be installed into NATO while at war?
Could you... well, I don't know, because NATO conventions don't allow for nations to be added that are at war or while NATO is at war. I don't know, maybe they'll overlook it at that point, but I have a feeling it would be highly unlikely that they would. They would still probably want to keep the process intact and not make any drastic changes or start breaking clauses of the NATO charter. So with that, I hope that does address the comment fairly well, and we are on to the next one. Also, Oscar Sweller said, Enforcer getting old. Dude, I'm only 20. Like, I'm only 20. Anyways, we're on to the next one. I think this is actually going to be the second to last one of the night. I think this is going to be the second to last one of the night, actually, because we're getting really close to... Yeah, this will be the second to last one of the night.
Oh, we got a bot somewhere in here? Where is it at? Oh, it's the one that I can't understand. Oh, there it is. It said hooray for Wagner, like it was like Winnie the Pooh. Oh, hooray for Piglet.
Oh man, dude, you know the guy sitting there, hooray for Wagner. Dude, the Wagner unit is almost dead already. They're not even there anymore. So who are you cheering on? The corpses? That would be a typical Russian thing to do, though, is cheer on dead people. But anyways, we are on to the next one.
The next one goes to Private Public 77, who says, with the history behind the Molotov cocktail name, should it be renamed for this war?
The Molotov cocktail. You know, that's an interesting question. Should it be renamed for this war? Maybe. But what would we name it after? Would we name it after Sergei? Would we call it the Sergei Shoigu cocktail? Honestly, I think Molotov ought to stick because it's just iconic at this point. But that was a really good question. What do you think, Matthew?
What was the question you were asking me again?
Should we rename the Molotov cocktail due to the context of how it got its name for the current war? And to give you the context, the Molotov cocktail was called that because Finnish forces came up with it in the Winter War, and they would fill up a bottle with alcohol, put a rag in it, set it alight, and then throw it at something. And they named it after Molotov, who came up with the invasion plan for Finland to mock them. So they're asking, should we rename it? And that's the context in mind.
Oh, no, I wouldn't rename it. The name's insignificant as long as you know what it's referring to. And also, you know, I don't get caught up in names of stuff. I mean, some people get way too deep, like, on stuff like that. I personally wouldn't care.
And honestly, I think I wouldn't change the name of it because Molotov cocktail has just become so iconic that it's kind of like renaming, you know, the Big Ben clock tower to the Jubilee Tower, because no one even knows it's technically called that now, and it's still called Big Ben by most people, so it would just cause some confusion, in my opinion. I would keep it as Molotov. So with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, and I believe that was the final one of the night, if I'm correct, Matthew.
No, that was actually the second to the last.
Wait, I gotta do the thing then. Okay, so who is the lucky last person to throw in the lucky last question of the night?
And this one is Andrew, who says, Matt, that Chinese balloon held up a huge payload. Oh, we're back to the Chinese balloon again.
God.
For the last one. What are the odds? But anyways, that Chinese balloon held up a huge payload, so why not have the balloons hold up nets or chaff nets to protect critical Ukrainian infrastructure from drones and missiles from Russia?
I feel like that wouldn't really work for too long because the balloons do lose altitude, and also that thing was at 60,000 feet. So unless if we have like 60,000 foot long nets, it wouldn't be that effective as it would just fly up so high. Unless if you kept it tethered to the ground, that's another thing. That's a different story. I don't know. I feel like it would kind of work in a way. I feel honestly it would just be better to get some large poles and put the nets in between the poles instead, because that would be more localized. It probably couldn't get damaged in any way, shape, or form. Seriously, that would require constant efforts to maintain that infrastructure. So I feel like it'd be better just to set them up with nets. But the balloons are another option if they wanted to do something like that. You could set them up like a barrage balloon. So with that, I hope that answers that question fairly well. And we finally have reached the end of tonight's stream with $11,000 raised. Unbelievable. I think we just passed that mark just a few minutes ago. And I've got to thank every single one of y'all once again for watching tonight. If y'all enjoyed, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and also comment, because that helps this channel to continue to grow, and it helps the Lee Spring Army to reach out and find more people. Not only that, it helps these fundraisers to continue to grow in size, because if you think 11,000 is big, wait until we reach everyone else out there. We'll be on and up into the area of, hell, I don't know, hundreds of thousands on a single fundraiser, and helping out thousands of Ukrainians each week. We're helping out hundreds, if not 1,000 right now, but we can always do a lot more. And you can always be a part in helping this army to grow. And so with that, thank you all so much once again for watching. I hope you all have enjoyed tonight. I thank everyone who supported this fundraiser, and I will see you all on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 24 hours of the war in Ukraine. Of course, we take Mondays off. Just to reiterate this again, every single day of the week, we are live at 10 p.m. Eastern Time covering the war in Ukraine, but on Mondays, we take the day off. So we'll be back on Tuesday to cover the past 48 hours of the war in Ukraine. So with that, good luck, take care, good night, stay safe, and I'll see you all after our break. And of course, Slava Ukraini!
Slava Ukraine!
Yes.
The Lee Spring Army sends its regards.
Share.
Ще нам, браття українці, усміхнеться доля. Згинуть наші вороженьки, як роса на сонці. Запануємо ми, браття, у своїй сторонці. Душу й тіло ми положим за нашу свободу і покажем, що ми браття козацького роду. Душу й тіло ми положим за нашу свободу.